Chronicles of the War of Souls book series. Book 1 Velaria, The Beginning of the End. Chapter 18. Harbingers of War. Kiron. The air, though dry and dusty, no longer smelled of the smoke from foreign hearths, and of fear it smelled of wormwood, thyme, and sun-baked clay. Yet through these familiar scents, another, vile and sickening one seeped, the stench of cinders, rotting meat, and orcish sweat. It should have smelled like home. It smelled of death. His path ran along the eastern fringes of the empire, not along the guarded borders with outposts and patrols, but along their underbelly, through the wild, forsaken lands where imperial authority reached only with the rare caravans of tax collectors and rumors of bandits. At first, the terrain was bleak and joyless hills, but with each day it changed, promising a peace that never came. Stunted shrubs gave way to feather grass that rustled in the wind, as if whispering of something eternal and vital, but its whisper now seemed a warning. The stony soil yielded to hard, springy turf, where his hooves beat out a clear, confident rhythm, neither sinking nor stumbling. That beat was like the pounding of drums, counting down the time to an inevitable meeting. Kiron moved swiftly. The wound, tended by the scout Ellen's careful hands, hardly troubled him now, healed over with a pinkish, still tender scar, and his mighty legs had regained their colossal strength. He did not gallop, he conserved his strength for the long road, but his trot was swift, and the earth yielded resiliently to his heavy, measured run. His eyes, accustomed to steppe horizons, scanned the signs of decay he met here with sorrow, seeing in them only part of the great sickness that had infected the world. Abandoned hamlets with sagging fences, dried-up wells, rare travelers with extinguished gazes who, upon seeing him, shied away, turning their faces. All these were scars upon the earth's body, symptoms of the same rot festering in the very capital, sores on living flesh promising swift decay. One dawn, as a cold, gray light began to spill over the steppe, he came upon traces of a recent raid, and the morning silence was deceptive. This was not the work of bandits. A merchant wagon looted and burned to ashes the torn, wild animal-gnawed bodies of people and takyaks lay in unnatural, grotesque poses. And the tracks were not orcs. They were the tracks of a goblin patrol, small, tenacious, left by bare, calloused feet with long, crooked toes digging into the ground. They came from the east, without concealment, brazen and self-assured. The threat was closer than anyone in Almerian could suppose. The blind capital continued to feast upon a volcano. Their hordes were already seeping west, like poison through the capillaries of forgotten trails, tainting all life. This encounter forced him to move even faster. His journey was no longer mere travel, it was a race with death, a mad gallop toward a cliff. He bypassed the rare settlements, unwilling to waste time on explanations and seeing how the same poison of fear and apathy tainted these hearts too, making them easy prey. At night, he lay down right on the steppe, on the hard, prickly grass, and watched the countless stars, so bright and close in the clear air. Cold and indifferent to his dread, he remembered the faces of his comrades, a grim resolve, Finder's wise weariness, the dwarves' fierce loyalty. Their mission had seemed hopeless there, in the stone trap of the capital, but here, under the open sky, he felt again its burning necessity, like thirst on a scorching noon. After several weeks, his path led him to low hills covered in scorched grass, beyond which, he knew, began the endless pastures of his own tribe, the Vrondar. His heart beat faster, an old, non-physical homesickness ached in his chest. But when he crested the ridge, the familiar childhood scene of peaceful nomadic life with hearth smoke and the cries of foals did not greet him. Below, in the broad valley where his kin's encampments had always stood, he saw only black circles from campfires, like gaps into hell, broken wagons, and ash heaps from which an acrid, throat-tickling smoke still curled. The air was heavy and bitter with the smell of cinders and death, Swedish and thereby even more revolting. This was no old ruin, the devastation was fresh, no older than a few days, and the very earth seemed to groan in pain. He charged down, his hooves crashing through the charred remnants of former life, scattering black embers. No bodies, no wounded, only a son left on the ground by crude boots and clawed paws. The ugly language of the enemy, orcs, wargs, and goblins again. They had passed through like locusts, scorching everything in their path, leaving behind only emptiness and silence. But unlike the human villages, this was not total slaughter, and in that lay a fragile hope. Centaurs were not sedentary cattle to be cornered and butchered. They were the wind, swift and untamable. Fighting, they could have retreated, Studying the tracks, pressing his fingers into the soft earth crisscrossed with hoofprints, Kiron realized with relief his kin had not been caught unawares. They had put up a fierce resistance. Everywhere lay fragments of orcish axes. The ground and wagon remained studded with blunt, bloodied arrows, and crucially, he found the traces of a mighty hoofed formation, deep and clear, leading south. Deeper into the steppes, a trail of retreat, not flight. They had fallen back, but were not broken. Their formation remained intact, meaning their spirit was unbroken. He stood amidst the smoking ruins of his home, and familiar, bitter rage seized him, the same hot, blind fury that had driven him at the walls of Khazad-Gotol, but now it was mingled with a cold, purposeful hope, tempered in fire and steel like a blade of good metal. His tribe was alive, and it fought, and where there was a fight, there was victory, and he had to find the path to it. Just as he had found this trail among the scorched hills, he did not linger among the ashes, where every charred fragment reminded him of the home he had lost. Taking up the trail of his herd, Kiron gave chase, and now the earth beneath his hooves responded not with a dull groan, but with the clear, furious rhythm of pursuit. His path now led into the very heart of the steppes, south, where perhaps the last free herds might gather to give a final stand against the advancing darkness, or be swept away by it, vanishing from the face of the earth like morning mist under a blazing sun. He was a harbinger, and the weight of that burden pressed on his shoulders harder than any armor. He bore not only the terrible tidings of war, but the bitter truth of an empire that had turned its back on the threat, hiding behind its walls like a frightened child, and the smoldering ember of hope, the tale of the Oath of Velaria, reborn in the fire of a distant dwarven fortress, where different peoples had for the first time in years remembered their duty. He raced like an embodiment of the steppe itself, mighty, solitary, relentless, carrying in his heart both the fury of the storm and the silence of endless expanses. And he felt this duality in every muscle of his body. His road was the road of a war already begun, and the echo of its coming battles already sounded in a whistle of the wind. Kiron followed the herd's trail like a shadow born of the steppe itself, an inseparable part of it. Understanding its every sign, he read the history of the retreat as one reads an ancient chronicle in a broken arrow, driven into the ground as a warning, in spatters of blackened, congealed blood on the silver tufts of feather grass, in the depth of the hoofprints speaking of weariness, not weakness. His kin had withdrawn swiftly, but not in Tanakan formation, covering their wounded, as eloquently attested by the uneven, dragging lines amidst the clear ranks on the soft ground. The trail led him ever southward, toward the heart of the steppe, the ancient gathering place of all herds in times of great calamity, where in bygone days the fate of the entire people was decided. And finally, from the crest of another hill, his face to the dry wind, he saw them, and his breath caught not from weariness, but from a sight that stole it away. The valley below, sprawling with wormwood and feather grass, teemed with life ready for battle, seething like a cauldron over a great fire. Hundreds, thousands of centaurs, warriors with long spears whose shafts touched the sky, sentries on the flanks whose keen eyes tirelessly scanned the horizon, women sharpening weapons on flat stones, their grinding merging into a menacing song. In the center, on a stony rise, a fierce debate raged, voices hoarse from shouting and impotence thundered, drowning each other out. Goblins, more of them every day. They crawl out like worms from the most unexpected places, for ravines and dried-up riverbeds, shouted a gray-haired giant with an axe on his back, his mighty nerves strained to the limit. Orcs are burning the humans' border villages, but now they march on our lands too, bringing fire and iron, echoed another, young and fierce, with a mad glint in his eyes. My encampment by Salt Lake was razed to the ground. We barely fought them off, losing our best warriors. And the Empire, where are their legions, their banners? A third seat, his face etched with wrinkles and scars. They hide behind their walls like gophers in burrows, watching us burn. It was at this moment, as the roar of argument reached its peak, that it began to subside, replaced by a swelling whisper of amazement and disbelief. Kiron strode through the camp, his powerful hindquarters rising in rhythm with his pounding heart, and hundreds of eyes, weary, frightened, blazing with anger, turned to him, to his solitary figure that had appeared as if from oblivion. He saw in them reflection of his own recent despair, the very emptiness that had gripped him on the road to Almerion. Kiron, came an astonished, faltering cry from the crowd. It's him. We thought you fell on the eastern border, struck down by an orc arrow. He did not answer. His gaze, heavy and intent, was fixed on the group of chieftains. Among them he saw Crowder, brother of Vrondar, an old and wise warrior who had temporarily become the chieftain's successor. While Vrondar had gone to the eastern borders with 100 centaurs, Croder, breaking off the heated debate, looked at him with a face contorted by an incredible mixture of joy, hope, and horror. Kiron ascended the hill and stopped before the assembly, his mighty chest heaving as he drew in air thick with the smell of fear and resolve. Croder, chieftains, his voice, low and hoarse from the long road, rang out with unexpected force, putting an end to all arguments and whispers, cutting through the air like a blade. I have returned. Kiron. Croder took a step forward, his rough, strong hand reaching hesitantly for the returned centaur's shoulder, as if testing whether a ghost stood before him. Spirits of the steppes, we had already mourned you. From where? Where have you been all this time? I have been far from here. Kiron swept his gaze over the gathered chieftains, seeing in their eyes a mix of hope and distrust, weariness and wrath. I come from under the dragon's spine, from lands of solid stone, where dwarven citadels reach for the heavens and plunge roots into the world's very depths. One of the chieftains, a burly centaur with a heavy mace at his belt, snorted, his lips twisting in a contemptuous smirk. What do dwarven stones matter to us? We have enough troubles of our own. Orcs, goblins besiege us from all sides. Or have you brought us something else? I bring the truth. Kiron's voice thundered like an underground tremor, forcing the distrustful chieftain to step back and fall silent. A truth that concerns all, from the gray-bearded elder to the foal. Those goblins you argue about, they are not mere bandits. They are harbingers, the first swallows of a storm gathering in the east, a storm compared to which all our present woes are but a gentle breeze. He paused, letting his words, heavy as lead, sink into the listeners' minds, seeing in their eyes a dawning awareness of the scale of catastrophe. You speak of raids. I speak of war. A war not for plunder or pasture, but for utter annihilation, for the erasure from the earth of all we know. And it is led not by some common orc chieftain. His name is the Iron Shaman. A murmur passed among the chieftains, like thunder before a storm. But Croder, not taking his sternly resolute eyes off him, raised a hand, demanding silence, and his authority made all fall quiet. Continue. Tell us all you know, withholding nothing. The power behind him knows no mercy, Kiron continued, and his voice held a soul-chilling conviction forged in fire and ash. It does not distinguish between humans, dwarves, or centaurs. It burns everything in its path, leaving neither grass nor life, and it is already here. I have seen its traces on the ravaged earth. I feel its breath in the air. And I see that you have gathered here not by chance, but because you sense the same threat. Do you think, after slaughtering the humans, they will stop? Do you think our boundless steppes will be too vast for them? No, for them, nothing will be sacred, and nothing too great. He straightened to his full colossal height, and his shadow, cast by the blazing torches, fell upon the gathered chieftains, a visible embodiment of his words. The muscles on his chest and back tensed like the strings of giant bows, and in his eyes, devoid of their former youthful fervor, swirled the cold light of distant stars and near despair. I came here to say one thing. We cannot sit on the sidelines like frightened marmots hiding in their holes. We cannot wait for this plague, this black canker, to reach the very heart of the steppe and poison its last springs, before it is too late, while our spears are still sharp and our hearts not burned to ash. We must act. Unite. With whom? The same burly chieftain asked sharply, almost ferociously, his fat finger with its crude nail pointing accusingly toward where, as all knew, lay the lands of men. With them, who abandoned their own villages to be torn apart like old harness, with dwarves, who have locked themselves in their stone womb like worms in rotten wood. Kiron looked at him, and in his eyes there was neither anger nor humbled plea, only a cold, heavy, granite-like certainty, one in the crucible of alien fortresses and on the ash heaps of his own hearth. With all who wish to survive, with all in whom a spark of will still glimmers, who understand that now the fate is being decided not of separate herds, not of one people, but of all free peoples, from the western seas to the eastern peaks. The time for old grievances and petty squabbles is past, washed away by the blood now being spilled. The time of choice begins, and on the choice we make today, here, under this sky, depends whether we will live, breathe this air and gallop over this grass, or become mere ashes scattered to the wind, of whom no song will be sung. He fell silent, and in the ensuing stillness, Only the crackle of torches and the heavy, tense breathing of hundreds of mighty chests could be heard. Crowder was the first to break the silence, and his voice, quiet yet reaching the farthest edge of the circle, sounded with a paternal, weary wisdom. "You left here a young warrior, hot and impatient," he said softly, "and you have returned. A man who has seen the enemy's face not in a fleeting skirmish, but in its very abyss. Welcome home, Kiron." Then he turned to the other chieftains, and in his eyes, deep set in their sockets, a fire of resolve kindled, the very one that had once guided their ancestors through great battles. "Now, chieftains, we will hear our messenger to the end, without interruption." It seems his words, suffered for and forged far from home, are more important than all our old disputes and grievances. The silence that followed Crowder's words was thick and ringing, like a bowstring drawn taut before the shot. Thousands of eyes, sun-scorched and clouded by recent loss, were fixed on the solitary figure on the hill. He was not merely a kin returned, whose coming seemed a miracle, he was a voice from another world, a world of unyielding stone and ancient, awakened horrors. Kiron stood motionless, feeling the weight of the mission upon him pressing his hooves into the soft earth. The air he breathed smelled of smoke from burned encampments, bitter wormwood, and the sweat of gathered warriors. He began to speak, and his voice, hoarse from road dust and experience, sounded even and weighty, without the slightest hint of doubt or fear. "You ask, with whom to unite?" He swept a slow gaze over the gathered chieftains, meeting open distrust, timid hope, and simple weariness. "I will tell you of an alliance already forged in steel and spilled blood, of an oath reborn in fire. I will tell you of what the leader of the Deepwarden clan, Braid Stoneheart himself, told us in the stone halls of Moruz de Merak, under the shadow of ancient vaults that remember the world's birth." He paused, letting them prepare for what they would hear, allowing their imaginations to picture the immensity of dwarven halls. "We stood in the Titan's hall, where echo repeats every step, dwarves in their sturdy plate, elves with detached and sorrowful faces, humans in worn cloaks, our centaur brothers like myself." Braid spoke, standing among us, and because his words came not from a high throne but from the very midst of the gathered, they gained even greater power. He spoke to us not as a commander to warriors, but as stone speaks to wine implacably and truthfully, without adornment. He opened our eyes to the true, monstrous scale of the threat before which all our past wars pale. "And what is this threat, able to frighten even dwarves born of stone?" asked Crowder, his wrinkled face like a wine-worn cliff holding the silence of ages. "Its name is the Iron Shaman," Kiron uttered. And the name rang in the ringing silence like a funeral knell, like a hammer's blow on the anvil of fate. But beneath that guise, beneath that orcish skin, lies not merely an orc-craving power. Braid revealed to us his true, horrifying nature. The one we ignorantly call the shaman is but a physical shell, a temporary vessel chosen for its endurance. A dark power has possessed him, one of the 12 ancients, spirit guardians of balance, born at the dawn of time with the world itself. But this guardian fell from the pantheon of gods, casting himself into the abyss of pride. He rejected his duty to preserve life and desired to subjugate all existence, to become its sole and absolute master. A restrained murmur passed among the chieftains, but this time there was less blind distrust and more grim, heavy foreboding, an awareness that the battle would be not for pastures, but for the very soul of the world. "Why would he want that?" the burly chieftain asked, still sharply but without the former fury. "Power over orc hordes, over scattered goblin tribes. That's been done before, and more than once. Not merely for that power," Kiron parried, and his voice rang with steel. Braid explained that the shaman does not simply kill. He collects souls. He does not destroy them, but imprisons them in his crystal, amassing stolen power. The very spark of being, the energy of life itself. That power, that pain and despair is fuel for his monstrous, incomprehensible goal. He wishes to challenge the authority of the creator gods themselves, to cast them down from the heavens, using against them the stolen life essence of their own creations. And each of us, be it centaur, human, or dwarf, is for him but kindling for this pyre. He saw how these words, heavy and incomprehensible as granite blocks, penetrated the listeners' minds, shattering their familiar notions of war, which for them had been only a fight for pasture and water, not a clash of gods. Braid said that his fallen brother, the wayward ancient, chose the orcs, for their souls are black by nature with hatred and malice, and their hearts, having known no light, are wide open to darkness like chasms in the earth's depths, but there are other ancients, keeping faith, and one of them, Gium, now guides Braid, a guardian remaining true to the primordial order of the world. His element is the stone firmament, the world's foundation. He can command it as we command our hooves, feeling every crack and ledge. And how does this guardian, turned to stone, propose to fight against a living, hate-breathing orc horde? Asked Crowder, his gaze intent and studying, as if trying to discern in Kiron's words not only meaning but hidden truth. With strategy and steel, Kiron answered firmly, without a shadow of doubt. His first decision, a commander's decision, not a deity's, was to retake Khazad-Katul. He told us then, and these words are carved in my memory: you cannot march to meet doom with a knife left in your back. That ancient dwarven fortress, captured by goblins long ago and become their nest, was that very knife in the back of all free peoples, and we went to wrench it out, to clear the path for the coming battle. And Kiron, seeing that abstract horrors did not reach his kin's hearts, shifted to a tale of a battle close and comprehensible to them all, to the language of blood and steel. We attacked together, shoulder to shoulder, and that was our greatest strength. Dwarves in their plate, elves with their ageless eyes, humans with hearts tempered in battle, our centaur brothers whose fury knew no bounds. The enemies were not only countless goblin hordes howling with greed, but trolls, huge and tenacious monsters, spawn of ancient darkness, capable of breaking a dwarven line and shattering gates strong as the mountain itself, with a single blow of their clubs. For a moment, Kiron fell silent, seeing again before his eyes the horrors of that battle. It was hell underground, in the stifling gloom where the air was thick with reek and dust. Goblins came wave after wave, trolls smash everything in their path with their clubs, and kobolds, nimble and vile, crawled from every crevice, hamstringing our warriors, dooming them to a slow death in the dark from poisoned blades. He paused again, and a shadow of pain, vivid and sharp, passed over his face. I saw one of the trolls, a giant with skin like cracked clay, grab a young centaur and simply tear him in half like a rotten rag, hurling the bloody pieces toward us. Vrondar, our chieftain, was gravely wounded in that fight, but he lives, his spirit unbroken. And he sent me here to bring these tidings to the free herds and to call all who still breathe, and remember the taste of freedom, to give answer to the approaching death. Before him rose the ghosts of fallen kin, the din of battle, desperate cries, and the suffocating reek of blood and sweat mingled with the smell of shattered stone. But Braid, he was like a hurricane descending from mountain peaks. He did not merely fight, felling foes with his warhammer. He changed the battle itself, reshaping the field of combat to his will. At his command, the stone floor rose in waves, sweeping away whole ranks of goblins, and a huge rock torn from the ceiling, as if hurled by a giant's hand, punched through the chest of a charging troll, impaling it. This was not mere magic familiar to elves, it was will turned to the flesh of stone, the very essence of the earth rising against the defilement. Khazad-Katul was retaken in the most brutal melee, and the enemy was swept from its halls. It was the first victory, bitter and dearly bought. But Braid said, as we stood among the dead, that this was only the beginning, merely clearing our own threshold before stepping out to meet the true storm gathering in the east. And what next? Asked Crowder, and in his voice now sounded not a request, but an inevitable, heavy acceptance of fate, heavy as a chain. Next war, Kiron said without pretense, looking him straight in the eye. War of total annihilation, where there will be neither mercy nor retreat. And for this war, to withstand it, an alliance is needed, strong as steel and true as an oath. After the battle, while smoke still hung in the subterranean halls and wounds still bled, the ancient Oath of Velaria was spoken anew. There, in the halls of the defiled but now cleansed Khazad-Katul, we all, every dwarf, elf, human, and centaur, swore to stand together, until the last of us falls, against the advancing darkness. He straightened to his full height, throwing back his mighty head, and his voice rang with the same iron, implacable force as Braid's words then, filling with the echo of the distant fortress. We must unite, with this oath in our hearts and this knowledge in our minds. The Iron Shaman will not stop at the Empire's eastern borders. His hordes already burn our steppes, desecrate our shrines. If we do not meet him there, shoulder to shoulder with other free peoples, we will meet him here alone, cut off from the world. And we will be swept away like dust from a carpet, and none will remain to remember our name. He fell silent, having poured out all he carried in his soul. His chest heaved heavily, filled with all he had endured, and in his ears, Despite the steppe's silence, still roared the deafening din of that recent battle from which there was no escape. Crowder slowly, with the dignity of an old warrior, approached Kiron. He raised his calloused, heavy as stone hand and placed it on his shoulder, and in that gesture was not only support, but a transfer of responsibility. In his eyes, faded by the merciless steppe sun, a silent struggle of fear and duty raged, but gradually, like hardening lava, resolve solidified in them. Familiar to Kiron from the face of Braid's stone heart the resolve to accept the inevitable. "You bring us not mere tidings, Kiron," he said quietly, yet so that every breath-held listener on the hill could hear. "You bring us a verdict cast by fate itself, and the only path, narrow and perilous, that leads through it." He turned to the other chieftains, and his voice, gaining strength, thundered like a hoof-striking rock, striking sparks. "You have heard. One can argue about plunder, about pastures, about old, world-weary grievances, but not about this. The choice is simple as a blade to die, alone, forgotten by all, or to fight together, shoulder to shoulder with those we once shunned." The burly chieftain, who had sneered earlier, shook his thick mane grimly, and his small, prickly eyes fixed on Crowder. "Words remain words, Crowder, but we have fought here, on our own land, watering it with our blood. We have seen our encampments burn and our foes perish." And he tells tales of demigods and dwarven prophecies born in stone darkness. "I do not ask for blind faith on my word alone," Kiron interjected, and his voice, sharp and confident, again drew all attention. Cutting off the brewing argument, "I will bring you a witness whose eyes saw what mine did, not a dwarf or an elf whose roads are far from ours. I speak of a cogit. His name is Immerse." On the hill, a wary, thick silence fell. The cogits were to centaurs, ghostly shadows of the scorching desert, rare and alien. But their proud independence, their strange, elusive martial art and unyielding will evoked in the steppe dwellers a silent, grudging respect. "We fought shoulder to shoulder in the stone corridors of Khazad-Gatol," Kiron continued, feeling the final stake had been placed. "He is a warrior, son of his tribe's chieftain, called the Desert Wind. And his people fell among the first, swept away by a black avalanche. The Iron Shaman wiped them from the face of the earth, leaving not one stone upon another." Kiron fell silent for a moment, letting these terrible words reach the listener's very consciousness, pierce their hearts like cold steel. He saw how even the most stubborn and warlike chieftains tensed upon hearing of a whole people erased from the earth, for the loss of one encampment was a misfortune, that the disappearance of an entire tribe became an ominous omen for all. Immerse was a captive of the shaman himself, in his black citadel, where the air was thick with foulness and despair. He saw everything with his own eyes, golden and piercing. He was forced to lead the army of darkness to the ruins of his own home, to his own hearth, to stop the endless executions of his king captured in battle. Kiron went on, gazing into the faces of Crowder and the other chieftains, seeking a response. He saw how the shaman himself, that fallen guardian, sacrificed his chieftain father on a black altar to terrorize the rest and break their will. He told us how the shaman does not merely kill, he collects souls, the very sparks of life, into his crimson, pulsating crystal, depriving peoples not only of a present, but of a past, their very memory, their songs and heritage. For him, the cogits of the Desert Wind are but the first kindling, the first spark in that colossal pyre in which he plans to burn the whole world to cinders. Kiron closed his eyes for a moment, remembering, picturing the cogit, and Immerse swore then, in chains, to become the last witness, the last one to remember the name and glory of his people. His pain, sharp as a blade, and his rage, cold as desert ice, that is what drives him now. And this same fate, terrible and final, awaits our herds too, if we do not move and dare to face the common peril. His words held no trace of embellishment or exaggeration, only the bare, soul-chilling truth conveyed from the lips of one whose golden, wildcat eyes had seen the very essence of the approaching horror. This story, stripped of the fairy tale quality of ancient prophecies about demigods, but filled to the brim with concrete, monstrous cruelty, affected the chieftains more powerfully than any prophecy. They understood to their marrow the destruction of encampments, understood the bitterness of losing kin. The weight of chains was familiar. They could easily imagine themselves in the place of that cogit, cornered and bereft of everything. And into this oppressive, ringing silence, pierced with horror and compassion, a new, young and hesitant voice broke. I saw them, said a young centaur scout standing at the very edge of the circle. All gazes, as one, turned to him, boring into his frightened figure. "Speak, Sabir, speak boldly," ordered Crowder, and in his voice was not only authority, but anxious expectation. "A few days ago, southeast, at the foot of the Sol Cliffs," the scout began, swallowing a lump in his throat, "our patrol came upon tracks. Not orcs or goblins, not their crude prints. The tracks were graceful, swift, with sharp edges, and beside them, in the soft ground, were prints of an enormous, powerful beast, like those of a giant cat." The scout continued, recalling that day. "We followed them, moving like shadows, and saw in the distance, in the heat haze rising from the scorched stones, 3 figures, 2 cogits, slender and light, and a majestic white saber-tooth. Its fur was the color of ivory, and it moved soundlessly, like a ghost. They were heading west, not looking back. We did not pursue, for our orders were scouting, not engagement." Kiron froze, feeling pieces of the mosaic begin to fit together in his mind like parts of a complex mechanism. Mercil had been absolutely certain his people were utterly destroyed. But what if someone had survived? If his chieftain father, wise and foresighted, had managed to send someone away at the last moment, as Verondar had sent him, Kiron, from the eastern border, a white saber-tooth, sometimes, in rare moments of rest on the road from Almerion to Naruz Damarak. Mercil had spoken of his people's customs, and in his tales this majestic animal had sometimes appeared. "Saber-tooth," Kiron whispered, almost to himself rather than to the assembly. Mercil said his father, the old chieftain, had just such a companion, huge, intelligent as a cogit himself. If it lives and travels with kin, then the Desert Wind tribe is not completely exterminated. They head west, fleeing death, seeking salvation, or perhaps allies, just as we are. This unexpected news struck the council like a whiplash on bearskin. If even the cunning and secretive cogits, whose tribes had for centuries been considered nearly elusive, were forced to flee, abandoning their scorching deserts, and suffering such losses, then the threat was far more terrible, monstrous, and relentless than mere scattered raids of plunder-hungry hordes. Crowder slowly straightened to his full colossal height. All his old age, all the weariness accumulated over years, seemed to fall from his mighty, scarred shoulders, washed away by a wave of stern resolve. Enough, his voice did not thunder, did not demand, but was filled with such indisputable, ancient authority that even the burliest, most stubborn chieftain would not dare object now. "We have heard tales of distant battles in stone depths. We have heard living testimony of a whole people's death, ground to dust. And now we hear with our own ears that the ash from that pyre has already reached our steps, and we can smell it. The wine spirits brought us today both tidings of war and tidings of hope, that even in the thickest darkness, amidst general ruin, there are those unbroken and ready to fight to the last breath." He took a powerful stride forward, to the very edge of the hill, addressing now not the circle of chieftains, but the entire multi-thousand herd, the thousands of eyes looking up at him from below, full of fear, anger, and expectation. "Centaurs, sons and daughters of the steppe, they try to corner us like wild beasts. They try to grind us to dust one by one and scatter us to the wind. But we are not meek sheep to be butchered in narrow pens. We are the free wind. And today, here and now, that wind changes its course." He turned to Kiron, and in his gaze burned not only resolve, but something akin to paternal pride. "You brought us the ancient Oath of Velaria, sworn in stone halls. We did not know it before, but today, under this open sky, we shall give our own, the Oath of the Steppe. We join this alliance, forged in blood. We will find the surviving cogits, if they still wander the earth. We will unite our swift hooves with the heavy axes of dwarves, the sure bows of elves, and the loyal swords of men. And together we will turn this war back, drive this darkness into the abyss from which it crawled, not for glory, not for plunder, for life itself, so that our stallions may again gallop over free, unburned steppe, and not smolder as a faceless spark in some mad usurper's cursed crystal." 'Tis words, mighty and simple, as the strike of a hoof upon the earth, exploded the silence, not with cries of blind approval, but with a deep, low, resonant murmur that passed through all ranks. From edge to edge of the valley a murmur of resolve born not from momentary fury, but from grim, inescapable necessity and a newly rekindled tiny hope. Kiron watched this awakening, this birth of a new will, and his own heart beat in unison with this swelling hum. as part of one great organism. His long and perilous mission was, at last, accomplished. The steppe, long slumbering in carelessness, had finally awakened, bristled with spears, and raised its head. And now this awakened steppe was to come to the aid of unyielding stone, to meet together, as a single wall, the advancing storm gathering in the east. The decision, heavy and inevitable, had ripened in the very air, thick with dust raised by hooves, bitter smoke of extinguished campfires, and universal tension. It hovered over the heads of the chieftains bent in deep thought, over the quieted, frozen in expectation over the steppe itself, seemingly holding its breath. The hum that rose after Croter's words was not merely a cry of approval, but a dull, subterranean groan of awakening earth, a thunderclap before the storm. It was a silent but full consent, suffered for and forged in the crucible of final despair. Croter slowly turned back to the tight circle of chieftains. His heavy gaze, like fate itself, slid over each face, searching for the slightest shadow of doubt. "Speak now," he uttered quietly, yet so that each sound, pure and distinct, reached even the farthest outskirts of the camp. "But speak not of fear, for we have all drunk fear to the dregs. Speak of the duty that lies upon each of us before the memory of the fallen, and the future of unborn foals." First to break the silence was the gray-haired giant with the axe on his back, his face like a wine-worn cliff, his eyes holding a heavy, leaden resolve. "My herd suffered heavy losses at Salt Lake," his voice, hoarse from years of command, sounded firm and uncompromising. "We mourned every warrior. But if we scatter now to our own corners like frightened marmots, they will pick us off one by one like quail in tall grass. I agree with Croter. Better to die in an open field, spear in hand, shoulder to shoulder with a brother, than to be slaughtered alone in my own encampment, unable to raise a weapon. My herd joins this march. Our fury has not yet cooled. Who will lead all of us, as one fist?" The burly chieftain still tried to find footing in the old, familiar logic, his fingers nervously toying with his mace's handle. "Who will be supreme chieftain in this madness? The dwarves. They live underground, and we on the steppe, under the sun. It's like an eagle agreeing with a mole on a joint hunt. I will lead the negotiations and be our voice in their council." All gazes, heavy and probing, fixed on Kiron. He stood motionless, his recently healed wound suddenly aching with a dull, deep pain. But he ignored it, staring intently at the burly chieftain. "I was there, in their stone halls. I know Braid's stone heart. I have looked into his eyes and seen in them the same resolve as in yours. I fought beside his warriors and saw all their unbreakable might in battle. I will be the link, our voice in their war council. As for tactics," he smiled, briefly and soundlessly, and in that smile was all the bitterness of hard-won experience. "The tactic is one to stand together, as one wall. Divided, we have already lost." "And the cogits?" asked Croter, returning all to the key, unresolved question, his finger pointing southeast. "You said they head west, fleeing death." "They must be found," Kiron stated, each word like a hammer's blow. "Any who raised a hand against the shaman or flees from him is our potential ally. Moreover," he paused, choosing the right, heavy words, "Mercil has earned the right to know that his tribe, his blood, is not utterly destroyed. This news may give him back the will to live, not just to blind vengeance. I propose we send light-mounted patrols southeast immediately, to the Salt Cliffs, to find their trail. Bring them here, under our protection, if they consent." "Good." Croter nodded, his decision swift and final. "Sabir, your patrol knows those places like their own hooves. Take another 10 of the swiftest and sharpest-eyed youths. Find them." The young scout, his eyes burning with the responsibility and pride placed upon him, immediately, without a word, nodded and rushed off to gather his squad, his hooves beating a rapid tattoo on the hard earth. "And what then?" asked one of the few female chieftains, her face dark from tan, etched with intricate ritual tattoos, each speaking of victory won. "Wait for the dwarves to send us a messenger. Wait for the shaman's hordes to reach our new camp and encircle us." "No." Croter struck his hoof against a stone protruding from the earth, striking a shower of sparks that flared brightly in the gathering dusk. "We will not wait like a cornered beast, hooves folded. We will march to meet our fate, choose the place and hour of battle ourselves. We move north." His words hung in the night air, cold and sharp as a honed blade's edge, and that chill penetrated every listener. "North, to those dwarven stones, into their stone sacks." The female chieftain asked, her narrowed, piercing eyes narrowing further to slits. "Yes," To our allies, Croder corrected her firmly. To Naruz Damarak. We cannot sit here, in the heart of the steppe, and naively hope the enemy will kindly dash itself against our wall of spears. We must join with the dwarves, unite our forces into one mighty fist. But our path there will not be flight or a plea for help. His gaze, heavy and full of grim, unshakable resolve, slowly slid over the faces of the gathered chieftains. We will march, cleansing our land of defilement, every goblin horde, every orc patrol, every creature that dared creep onto our eastern borders. We will sweep away in our path, leaving not one stone upon another. We will turn our march into a cleansing broom. Let the shaman learn that his tentacles meet not quiet fear, but a furious hurricane. This idea and active, offensive march, war on their own terms ignited anew wildfire in the eyes of even the weariest warriors. This was not a plan of retreat or passive defense. It was a loud declaration of war, flung in the face of the darkness itself. But first, Croder raised a hand, anticipating new questions and objections. We must find these cogits and decide what role they can play in our common plan. Whether they will become our brothers in arms or choose to slip into shadow. Perhaps they, like us, seek not only salvation but vengeance for their trampled people. We cannot leave them in the steppe without offering a hand. He turned to where Sabir had stood, but the young scout was already gone. He was galloping, raising clouds of dust, to gather his patrol. Sabir and his warriors leave at dawn. With the first ray of sun, Croder proclaimed, and his voice, low and commanding, rolled through the entire camp. Reaching the farthest tents, they have 2 weeks, until the next full moon, when the night orb is round as a shield. Find the surviving cogits and bring them here, under our protection. We will give them shelter, food, and an honored place in our ranks, and until they return with news, our herds do not move. The decision was wise, measured, and final. It gave precious time to prepare the enormous, hitherto unseen steppe host for the long and perilous march, to gather supplies, repair weapons and armor. And it sent a clear signal to all the steppe centaurs: do not abandon those who fight the common enemy, even if those warriors are strangers. United with them only by shared grief and shared hatred of the dark. The council was over, and the chieftains, without a word, without the nosy arguments usual for steppe dwellers, silently dispersed to their herds, their silence filled with concentrated fury and accepted necessity. No loud cries or lively discussions were heard, only titanic, deep work began at once, without fuss. The steppe around the heart of the steppe seethed with activity, invisible and inaudible from the hilltop, but felt in every nerve like the powerful, steady beat of one huge heart. From all sides, merging into one continuous hum, came the insistent grind of whetstones on steel spearheads and arrows, the dull, rhythmic clang of smiths' hammers adjusting tips and armor, and the abrupt, quiet commands of elders distributing duties among thousands of kin. Kiron stood on the same hill, watching this grand, titanic preparation, and it seemed to him his own, not yet fully healed, wound closed faster from this very spectacle of universal will. He saw elders with trembling hands and young stallions with serious, prematurely adult faces sorting and packing their meager supplies into sturdy leather sacks. He saw women with stern, concentrated faces preparing long rolls of clean cloth for bandages and stringing thin strips of cured meat on cords to stretch it for the long, unknown road. He saw experienced, scarred warriors conducting final, polished drills with the youth, practicing swift, crushing attacks in formation and precise archery, full gallop, with the earth flying from under their hooves. The entire huge herd, recently scattered and despondent, was transforming into a single, finely tuned military mechanism where every cot knew its place. And at the very eastern edge of the camp, at the very exit from the broad valley, where the long shadow of the hills already fell, a small, carefully selected squad gathered. 10 young, swiftest and most enduring centaurs, led by Sabir. They were not burdened with heavy baggage or armor, only light waterskins, a pouch of cured meat, and bows with tightly packed quivers. Their task was not to engage in desperate battle, but to find, catch up to, and what was hardest, persuade to come. The first ray of the rising sun, pitiless and clear as on the day Kiron arrived at the heart of the steppe, touched the tops of distant hills, staining the sky crimson and gold. At that very moment Croder, his mighty figure seeming carved from stone in the morning light, slowly approached the gathered scout squad. "You are the steppe's eyes and ears now. It's fine sense," he said without raising his voice, but each word fell like a stone into the ensuing silence. Your speed and wits depend not only on the lives of those you seek, but on the timing of our common advance. 2 weeks, no more. If you do not find them, return empty-handed, but with your hide intact. We cannot wait forever while the darkness closes its pincers. We will find them, Crowder, Sabir said, his young, not yet weathered face serious, but uncertainty readable deep in his eyes, a thin crack splitting his bravado. But what should I tell them if we catch up? To just come with us, strangers. To them, we are all strangers with steers. And their war cats. He fell silent, but all standing around understood the unspoken. Saber-tooths, raised for centuries to defend their own from any threat, might see it in a squad of unfamiliar centaurs. One wrong gesture, one abrupt move, and instead of desired allies, the herds would get only the mangled bodies of their own messengers. Crowder slowly, heavily nodded, his aged, faded gaze becoming intent and piercing. You are right, youth. Brute force will not help here. Force has already decided everything before us, and not to our benefit. You will tell them only 2 words. Remember them. He paused, letting Sabir and the others absorb this thought. First, Mercil. Say that Kiron knows him, that he lives, that he fights with us against the common enemy. That name will be known to them. It will resonate in their blood. It is the only key that can unlock their trust. Sabir listened tensely, absorbing every word like a sponge, his ears twitching with concentration. And the second? What is the second word? Second, Oath of the Steppe. Tell them the centaurs have sworn an oath, sealed in blood and will, to fight shoulder to shoulder with all touched by the shaman's iron hand, that we offer not patronage or pity, but a military alliance, blood for blood, claw for claw. Nothing more is needed. If they agree, if they understand, they will come themselves. If not, Crowder spread his powerful hands, and in that gesture was all the bitterness of an adult centaur. Then no other words, no persuasion will convince them. Sabir's face cleared, youthful uncertainty replaced by clear, precise understanding of the task. 2 words. A name and an oath. Understood. Mercil and Oath of the Steppe. Without further words, without farewell cries or pompous ceremonies, at dawn, as the sun just showed above the horizon, the squad set out in the direction where days before they had seen the ghostly Cogits and the white, ghost-like saber-tooth. Their hooves, light and swift, barely touched the earth, raising a small cloud of dust immediately carried away by the awakening morning breeze. They merged with the golden haze of the steppe almost instantly, like ghosts dissolving in sunlight, carrying with them not a heavy burden of weapons, but 2 short, incredibly heavy words on which so much now depended. Kiron watched them, not taking his eyes off until the last small dot disappeared beyond the jagged horizon, and then he felt something clench inside him. Now there was only to wait. Wait and prepare, sharpen weapons and gaze east. The steppe around held its breath, frozen in tense, almost palpable expectation, like an old, experienced predator gathering strength before the decisive, lethal leap. The fate of the entire march, and perhaps of the whole fragile alliance, now depended not only on the speed and luck of a handful of youths, but on the magical power of 2 words they carried into the very heart of an alien, unfamiliar grief. Several exhausting and cold days and nights, Sabir's squad traversed the boundless steppes, which had transformed from a symbol of freedom and home into a merciless, limitless labyrinth full of ambiguous signs and false trails. The air, once filled with the bitter scent of wormwood and sunwarmth, was now thick with acrid dust and gnawing anxiety. They moved southeast, unwaveringly, toward the salt cliffs bluing in the distance, the last place where they had seen that ghostly squad of Cogits and their giant white companion. At first the tracks were clear, as if scratched on the earth's surface by fate itself for their convenience. Sabir, whose young but incredibly sharp eyes had first noticed the strange travelers not long ago, now led the squad with stubborn, almost fanatical certainty. They found clear prints of the saber-tooth's slight, almost feline paws, rare but recognizable tracks of the Cogit's bare, prehensile toe feet, a fragment of a thin bone bead once woven into dreadlocks. Each such find made young hearts beat faster, filling them with new strength. That the steppe is a living, breathing organism, indifferent to their hopes. The wind, their eternal enemy and ally, smoothed over the sandy scars in a single night, as if erasing what was written. Short but fierce downpours, suddenly falling from a perfectly clear sky, washed everything clean, leaving behind only pure, wet ground. By the 5th day, the tracks became ghostly, fragmentary, almost mythical. They found a depression in trampled grass that could have been left by a passing badger, a lone broken shrub branch that could have been snapped by a running wolf. Despair, quiet, cold and sticky as morning mist, began to undermine their resolve from within. "They've dissolved into the very air," grumbled one of the young centaurs, Aaron, bending over yet another barely noticeable, dubious mark. "Maybe we just imagined it all then. Maybe they were steppe spirits leading us by the nose." "Spirits don't wear bone beads or leave tufts of saber-tooth fur on tamarisk thorns," Sabir retorted dryly, restrainedly, squeezing in his sweaty palm that very carefully preserved tuft of white, soft fur found at the foot of the salt cliffs. That in his own, usually confident voice, a weary, corroding uncertainty crept in. They widened their search circle, fanning out to cover as much ground as possible, that the boundless steppes seemed to deliberately hide from them, the tracks they so desperately sought. Days merged into a monotonous, exhausting cycle of climbing high hills for weary surveys of the surroundings, and descending into dusty hollows in vain but stubborn hope of finding something, anything, the slightest clue. Water supplies in the skins dwindled with each day, and with them, drop by drop, went the last hope. And another night they spent by a pitiful, barely trickling stream, sallously chewing tough-as-leather-cured meat, unable to look each other in the eye. The specter of a shameful return empty-handed, mission unfulfilled, haunted their tiny, smoldering campfire, poisoning every sip of water and every bite of food. On the 9th day, when the sun stood at its zenith and the air above the ground shimmered and streamed with unbearable heat, Sabir, climbing onto another rocky outcrop, suddenly froze as if rooted. His hand shot up involuntarily, demanding absolute, immediate silence. The others, frozen below at the foot, instinctively held their breath, staring at him. "Smoke," Sabir whispered, and his nostrils, white and mobile like fissures in rock, quivered, greedily drawing in the thin air. Barely noticeable, a thin stream. Not a lone traveler's campfire. A roasted jerboa carcass doesn't smell like that. This smells of rotten grass and old, sun-baked clay. They moved toward that barely perceptible smell, sneaking like hungry wolves on the hunt, forgetting the weariness and despair that had gnawed at them all these days. Sabir's heart hammered in his young chest like a real mallet, echoing dully in his temples. And then, through sparse, stunted thickets of elm, they finally saw what they had so long and hopelessly sought. The sight was unlike either a nosy centaur encampment or a settled human village. It rather resembled a giant, sprawling anthill, nestled in a deep, skillfully hidden ravine shielded from prying eyes. Dozens of low, sloping tents, sewn from sturdy camel hides and woven flexible branches, blended with the yellowish-gray, scorched landscape as if growing from the very earth, becoming part of it. In the still air hung a thick, complex smell, a mix of smoke from smoldering roots, sharp dessert spices, and wild feline scent. Cogits, men and women with light, muscular bodies and skin dark as if soaked in sun. Their slanted, almond-shaped golden eyes glinted coldly from the depths of hoods and shadows. Some, squatting with unnatural ease for other peoples, mended their quilted, sturdy thread-stitched dust-colored robes. Others with silent, almost ritualistic concentration sharpened long, curved blades resembling sharp sickles on small stones. Even children, just as lithe, nimble, and unchildishly quiet as their parents, bustled about. And their strange, devoid of usual childish nose games seemed part of the common, austere life. But the most impressive, captivating, and frightening sight were their beasts. Giant cats, saber-tooths, lay in the scant shade of tents or paced leisurely, with predator-born grace, along the very edge of the camp, patrolling an invisible perimeter. Their spotted, yellow-brown hides blended perfectly, deceptively, with the scorched grass and sandy soil, and their mighty, long fangs protruding from under their upper lips, inspired simultaneous animal terror and deepest respect. And among this majestic pack, like a pale ghost, stood out one, a huge, uncapped-like powerful saber-tooth with rare, luxurious fur the color of ivory. It lay on a small rise like on a throne, and its cold, pale blue eyes, as if absorbing the ancient ice of mountain peaks, impassively and methodically surveyed the surroundings. This was that very unique beast Sabir had seen then. In the shimmering haze at the foot of the salt cliffs, Sabir's heart lurched, stopped for a moment, then beat with new, feverish force. They had found them. Not a handful of exhausted fugitives, but a whole, living settlement. An entire people forced to abandon their ancient rock shelters in the far wastes and seek salvation and refuge here, in alien steppes. Suddenly, for no visible reason, the white saber-tooth raised its heavy, mighty head. Its large ears pricked forward, and its wide nostrils flared, drawing in air. It did not growl, gave no loud signal, merely emitted a low, guttural, warning rumble like distant thunder before a storm. And that was enough. Instantly, as if by an invisible hand's wave, all life in the camp froze, stopped in its flow. Hundreds of pairs of golden, glowing eyes turned as one toward the single direction where, hiding behind bushes, the centaurs stood, the hands of men and women, with smooth, practiced movements, unobtrusively rested on the hilts of curved blades. The saber-tooths, moments ago lying in half-slumber, rose from their resting places, their backs arching in tense, ready to leap curves, greenish fire kindling in their eyes. They had been tracked. Not they who had found, but they who had been discovered. Sabir understood there were seconds for thought and hesitation. He slowly, very smoothly, so as not to provoke a sudden attack, rose to his full height, tossing aside his bow, a symbol of aggression. His companions, holding their breath and gripping spear shafts in sweaty palms, after a momentary pause followed his example, emerging from cover one by one. From the dense, silent crowd of Cogits, an old but unbent by years warrior emerged just as slowly and majestically. His face, dark and desiccated by desert winds, was etched with fine, intricate ritual scars that spread from high, prominent cheekbones to temples like an elaborate web spun by fate itself. Thick, dark dreadlocks, interwoven with worn, yellowish bone beads, hung heavily on his narrow, sinewy shoulders. He was lean and muscular as a rope, and his bearing, even in this humiliating situation of flight and loss of home, remained straight, proud, and truly regal. "Who are you and why have you come to our camp, children of the wind?" The elder's voice was quiet, raspy like the rustle of dried sand over sun-hot stone, but it carried such inner, iron strength and dignity that his words reached every ear clearly, without effort. In his golden, piercing eyes was no fear nor open threat, only cold, millennial weariness and heavy, bottomless weariness shot through with grief. Sabir, feeling his legs weaken, took a step forward, his own heart hammering somewhere in his throat, hindering breath. He forced himself to remember Crowder's stern command, the two treasured words now his only weapon. "We come in peace," he began, trying to keep his young voice from trembling, betraying inner panic. "We are centaurs of the Vrondar herd. We sought you, followed your trail for many days." The old Cogit's gaze grew even more intent, heavier. Not a muscle moved on his inscrutable, stone-masked face. "And why would steppe steeds, whose herds graze the expanses, need children of the desert, exiled from their home and deprived of all, even the ash of their hearths?" Sabir drew a deep breath, gathering his thoughts, feeling the weight of the entire camp's gaze. Hundreds of eyes and dozens of predators ready to pounce. Everything, absolutely everything now depended on these two words, on their magical power. "We seek you because of one name," he uttered, and his voice finally found firmness. "Mercil." The effect was instantaneous, staggering, and absolute. A restrained, hissing, snake-like whisper passed through the ranks of the frozen Cogits, as if an invisible pack of vipers ran over hot sand. Golden eyes, until now cold, detached, and empty, flared with a whole gamut of turbulent, conflicting feelings from burning distrust to sudden, wild, almost painful hope. Even the majestic white saber-tooth on its rise emitted a short, guttural, questioning sound, and its pale blue, icy eyes seemed to come alive for a moment, a spark of recognition flashing. The elder slowly raised his withered hand, and immediately the troubled whisper died, replaced by oppressive, ringing silence. But his own, until this moment absolutely impassive expression gave the first, barely noticeable crack, through which peered a shadow of long-concealed pain. "What do you, stranger, know of Mercil, son of our chieftain?" he asked, and in his always even, desert lake surface voice sounded for the first time not a ritual mass, but genuine, burning, living interest. "He lives," Sabir stated clearly and loudly, so all could hear, feeling icy shivers run down his spine. "He fights against the darkness. Our kin stood shoulder to shoulder with him in the brutal battle for the dwarven stone fortress, called Khazad-Dotol. He believes his entire tribe, all children of the desert winged, were exterminated by the Iron Shaman to the last infant." Sabir shifted his gaze to the giant beast. "And he also, in moments of openness, described the great white saber-tooth that was his father's faithful companion. It was by that description we found you. At the mention of the cursed shaman's name, an invisible, soul-chilling wind passed through the entire camp. Cogit faces, already stern, turned to stone, and in the depths of their golden eyes flashed familiar, bitter as wormwood hatred, suffered for in the ashes of their hearths. He told us his father, chieftain of your tribe, was sacrificed on a black altar, and his soul, his very essence, was consumed and imprisoned in the bloody crystal on that iron shaman's staff. Sabir continued, and his simple, utterly unadorned words sounded thereby even more convincing and terrible. The elder was silent for several agonizing, endless seconds, his piercing, old eagle gaze studying Sabir as if trying to read the very essence of his soul, distinguish truth from skillful lie. The centaur's heavy words about the chieftain's terrible fate hung in the heated air, like a funeral bell ringing across the desert, and the silence that again reigned in the camp was now 1,000 times more terrible than any cry of rage or despair. It was alive, pulsating like an unhealed wound that had broken open for a moment and instantly frozen in icy, bottomless muteness. And into this icy tomb of universal grief, Sabir began to slowly, as if driving nails, pour anew, cosmic horror the revelations brought by Kiron from the dwarven stone halls. But Mercil, like all of us at first, saw only a small part of the truth, the tip of a black mountain. His voice grew stronger, filling with sinister, unfamiliar to the steppe overtones. Our kin, who came to us from under the dragon's spine, told us more. The one we ignorantly call the shaman is but a shell, temporary flesh. In him lives and rules a fallen ancient spirit, one of the 12 guardians of the world, who desires to become the sole and absolute master of all existence. The Cogit's gazes, until now hollow only with personal grief, began slowly to fill with new, deeper and unreasoning fear of something incomprehensible. He does not simply kill, as orcs do in their blind fury. Sabir hammered each word, feeling their monstrous weight. He collects souls, like a reaper ears of grain, imprisons them in his accursed crystal, to erase entire peoples, not only from the earth's face, but from memory of eternity itself. He devours being itself, the very spark of life, to turn its stolen power against the creator gods themselves. Sabir spoke these words, perfectly understanding their meaning and burden. Your tribe, children of the desert wind, became for him but the first handful of kindling for that colossal pyre, in which he plans to burn our whole world to cinders. But his appetite is insatiable. His hordes already burn our steppes, desecrating sacred places. His orcs, like venomous serpents, already crawl west, bringing death and ruin. He will spare none, neither humans hiding behind stone walls, nor dwarves who went into mountain depths, nor centaurs who gallop over free feather grass. And you, children of the desert, he will find and reach even here, in the very heart of alien lands. Sabir saw how the monstrous, boundless picture of the coming end slowly dawned in the stunned, wide-open eyes of the Cogits. At first, no one stirred, as if spellbound by terror. Then a restrained but thereby only more crushing, dull groan passed through their ranks, torn from hundreds of throats at once. Women, unable to bear the weight of what they heard, covered their faces with slender hands, their shoulders shaking in soundless, wrenching sobs. Men, whose faces were already stone masks, stood motionless, gripping the hilts of their curved blades so hard their knuckles whitened. In their eyes, which moments ago had flashed a spark of wild hope, now swirled and danced only one all-consuming emotion, bottomless, primal rage mixed with the bitter sediment of long-suspected but now finally confirmed loss. They knew their chieftain had stayed to accept death and let others escape. But to hear of such defilement, such desecration, that his soul, his eternal essence, had become a trophy in the hated enemy's crystal. But the most heart-rending, blood-chilling sound came not from a human chest. The white saber-tooth, lying on its rise like a statue, slowly, with incredible effort, rose on its powerful paws, its colossal body tensed like a bowstring, mighty muscles rippled under ivory white fur. It did not growl, did not bare its terrible fangs. Instead, it let out a drawn-out, low, hollow howl, full of such inexpressible, piercing grief that even the seasoned centaurs, accustomed to any wild sounds of the steppe, felt blood freeze in their veins. This howl was like the crack of breaking age-old ice, like the moan of the desert itself having lost its sun and its heart. It lasted several eternal seconds. Then the majestic beast collapsed heavily to the ground as it fell, laying its huge head on its front paws, and its blue, mountain-lake eyes, now burning with cold fire of rage and sorrow, stared at one point, seeing only the image of the fallen friend and master. And at this moment of universal breaking, Sabir, mustering all his will, uttered the second main part of the message for which they had made this long and perilous journey. But we bring you not only tidings of death, we bring you tidings of the Oath of the Steppe. He paused, letting these two words, simple and mighty, penetrate the very heart and mind of the listeners burdened with grief. Centaurs, all free herds, have gathered and sworn that oath, to fight to the last breath together with all touched by the shaman's black hand. We offer you not patronage or pity. We offer a military alliance, equal and honest, blood for blood, claw for claw. We are already turning and marching north to join our forces with dwarves and other free peoples who have sworn their oath. We march to a war from which there is no return, and we call you to come with us, to strike together. The elder stood motionless as a rock against which waves break. He seemed not even to breathe, having turned all into hearing and pain. His face, etched with scars of past battles and wisdom, became like an ancient, sun-cracked clay tablet on which the final verdict for an entire people was inscribed. Only his hands, clenched into tight, bony fists, trembled finely and helplessly, betraying the storm within. So, his voice was quieter than a whisper, drier than sand, but it cut through the mournful silence like a honed blade. So it has come to pass, not merely a warrior's death in honest combat, the perishing of the very spirit, the desecration of eternity. He slowly, with incredible difficulty, shifted his gaze from Sabir to his tribesmen, seeing their mute pain, their restrained wrath, their bottomless despair. Now you have all heard, now do you know all. No room remains for doubt, no shadow of hope for a happy miracle remains, only memory remains, and duty, a duty of vengeance stronger than death. He took a heavy step toward Sabir, and his golden eyes, recently extinguished by grief, regained piercing, predatory sharpness. You see now, messenger, what you have brought us in your heart. You bring not only tidings of a surviving son, but the final, irrevocable death of our last comforting illusions. He smiled bitterly, soundlessly, and in that smile was all the bitterness of years lived. A wise, truly wise choice of your chieftain. Now we, children of the desert, truly have nothing left to lose except these invisible chains of despair that shackled our hearts. Actor slowly turned to his people, raising his head so the rays of the setting sun fell on his wrinkled face, and every feature froze in stern resolve. Children of the desert wind, you have all heard every terrible word. Our chieftain, our father and protector, fell not simply in honest combat, bearing his chest before the enemy. His soul, his eternal shadow, is captive to one who intends to erase even the memory of us, of our ancestors, from this earth's face, as wind erases footprints on sand. This youth, he nodded toward Sabir, and in his gesture was not only gratitude, but the weight of responsibility placed, brings us tidings from Myrsel, our heir, whose heart still beats in his breast and who continues to fight far from home. And he brings not only this, but word of a great alliance, of the Oath of the Steppe. Actor pointed his hand toward the horizon. They, children of the wind, offer us not degrading pity, but the edge of steel, not temporary shelter, but the field of the last battle. And I ask you now, when all merciless truth lies before us like a naked blade, are we ready to remain merely fugitives, wretched dust motes seeking salvation in alien lands? Are we ready to become warriors again, as we were born? Are we ready to raise our weapons to avenge our chieftain and return him eternal peace, wrenching his immortal soul from the shaman's iron claws? The answer was not a near-splitting cry, not a furious roar, but a low, coming from the depths of the chest, unanimous rumble like the rumble of an awakening volcano. Hundreds of throats, male, female, even children's, exhaled a single word that ceased to be merely a word, becoming an oath carved in the stone of eternity, an oath full of blood and ashes. Vengeance. He nodded, heavily and slowly, and for the first time in the long days of exile and mourning, something glinted in the corners of his faded eyes, not a tear of weakness, but a cold glint of steel, the glint of a final decision tempered in the crucible of sorrow. He turned to Sabir, and his gaze became direct and inescapable. My name is Actor. Long ago, in another life, I was the right hand and advisor of our chieftain. Now I am merely the guardian of his orphaned people and executor of his last, unspoken will. We will hear your leader. We accept the terms of your Oath of the Steppe. His gaze, heavy and full of meaning, slid toward the white saber tooth, motionless as a statue. And into this last campaign, into battle, we will be led not only by our own hatred, but by its mute, all-crushing sorrow. It led us through underground tunnels when cliffs collapsed. It saved us on the open steppe when death pursued us. And now it, the embodiment of our loss, will lead us to retribution. The word was given, and with its utterance, the air, moments ago trembling with pain and restrained rage, suddenly stretched taut as a tight bow. A bowstring charged not with an arrow, but with action itself. An instant, titanic change came over every cogite of the desert wind tribe. Their grief, heavy, amorphous, and paralyzing, was displaced by cold, sharp, blade-like, purposeful fury. Now each of them, from gray elder to young teenager, knew they were not merely surviving, wandering from one shelter to the next. They were marching to take vengeance, and in that was a new, terrible meaning to their existence. Actor, whose lean but unbending figure seemed now carved from the very granite of sorrow and resolve, gave several quiet, abrupt, emotionless orders to the approaching elders. They, in turn, silently, merely nodding, dispersed through the camp, and the complex mechanism, honed by centuries of nomadic life and tempered by recent bitter flight, came into motion without fuss or unnecessary words. A concentrated, almost ritualistic and silent gathering began. Women, with faces petrified by grief but hands remembering every movement, began folding tents with unnatural, almost mechanical speed. Sturdy camel hides and woven flexible branches were packed into tight, strap-bound bundles, which were immediately, silently, taken up by men, their muscles straining under the weight not only of belongings but of common fate. Children, quieted and unchildishly serious, helped as they could, gathering scattered clay utensils and leather pouches of supplies, their frightened eyes now burning not with childish fire, but with the reflection of adult, stern resolve. From behind tents, dromedary camels were led out these enduring, silent desert giants, now saviors in alien steppes. Their humped, bony backs were already laden low with meager possessions, cracked sacks of cured meat and ground grain, salt cure, leather-smelling waterskins, bundles of healing herbs gathered in distant oases. To these bundles was now added, and took primary place, weaponry, much weaponry. Long, curved blades like sickles of the young moon, short but taut bows of horn and wood, leather quivers tightly packed with arrows with dark feathers of desert hawks. Actor, standing motionless and watching the preparations, raised his withered hand and emitted a short, piercing whistle more like the shriek of a raptor calling its flock. From the sky, from the celestial heights, where only rare clouds drifted, a dark, swift dot plummeted. It grew before their eyes until it became a majestic, proud eagle with piercing, unbirdlike intelligent eyes. To bird silently, with dignity, alighted on the elder's shoulder, its powerful yellow claws gripping the quilted fabric of his dusty robe carefully, but firmly. "Look, old friend," Actor whispered, touching a finger to the bird's stiff, glossy breast feathers. "We are leaving, folding our tents for the last time. But this time not in flight, saving our skins. We carry with us our wrath, our duty, and our sorrow. Fly beside us. Be my eyes in the skies of our new allies. Be the guardian of our path." The eagle inclined its proud head as if understanding and accepting every word, and its sharp gaze was fixed into the distance, northward. It was not merely a bird, it was a messenger, a living link to the sky, an ancient symbol of their tribe, soaring over sands and rocks. And everywhere, like silent shadows, moved the saber-tooths, adult, battle cats, whose grief had poured out not in a roar but in this soul-chilling, ominous silence, now patrolled around the camp, in an outer circle, their amber eyes glowing in the twilight seeking the slightest imagined threat, their backs tense. They, like their two-legged kin, understood with their whole animal being the path back home was closed forever. Now the only path left was forward, toward war, toward vengeance. The white saber-tooth, this living ghost, slowly rose from the ground. It seemed the very bottomless sorrow had lent its colossal figure even more grandeur and fearsome strength. It paced unhurriedly, with imperturbable dignity, through the bustling camp, and the cogites parted before it, respectfully touching its white fur with fingertips in a mute, meaningful gesture of respect, loyalty, and shared oath. It was the last link, a living thread binding them to the fallen chieftain, and now its silent, all-consuming fury became their banner under which they were to go into the last battle. Sabir and his centaur stood aside, watching this deafening, in its own way. Silence broken only by the muted creak of leather, the rustle of shifted weaponry, and the measured breathing of camels. They saw before them not a confused crowd of refugees, but an awakening, formidable hive, every movement in which was subordinated to a single, terrible goal. Here was no place for panic, uncertainty, or idle talk. There was only the cold, meticulously calculated rhythm of preparation for the long, unknown road and the war awaiting at its end. Within hours, nothing remained of the once lively camp spread in the sheltered ravine, as if it had never been. The earth at the campsites was neatly leveled by experienced hands, fire pits carefully covered with sand, and tramped down so not even smoke would betray recent presence, wherein the morning life had ceased. Only trampled grass remained, and an invisible, but heavy memory of the decision made, lingering in the very air. Actor approached Sabir with a firm step. Behind the elder, as if from the very earth, stood his entire people, ready for the march. Men and women still capable of holding weapons walked ahead, their faces turned north. Behind them, forming a living wall, stretched lines of pack camels surrounded by a ring of elders and children whose eyes now burned, not with fear but stern resolve. And on both flanks, blending with the terrain so the eye could barely catch movement, soundless as ghosts, moved the saber-tooths, their spotted hides flickering in the tall, dry grass like reflections of the setting sun. The white giant walked at Actor's right hand, its head held high, cold, implacable fire in its pale eyes. "We are ready, messenger," Actor said. His voice was even and calm, but in it felt the steely spring of a drawn bowstring ready to snap straight at any moment. "Lead us to your people. Lead us to the place where this oath of the steppe was given." He slowly swept his gaze over his tribesmen, and in that gaze was all their common fate. The desert wind no longer flees the storm. Henceforth we are the storm itself, bearing retribution, and we are ready to unleash it upon the head of our common enemy. The road back to the heart of the steppe, where they were awaited with impatience and anxiety, began in rinning, almost unbearable silence broken only by the eternal rustle of feather grass under light centaur hooves and the soft, soundless tread of broad saber-tooth paws. To dissimilar columns the swift, almost weightless shadows of cogits and the mighty, majestic centaurs now moved as a single, coordinated organism united by common pain and common purpose. Sabir walked ahead, making way, and all the time felt upon him the heavy, studying, utterly warmthless gaze of Actor. The elder was silent, immersed in his thoughts, and his faithful eagle circled high in the sky, its piercing, keen eyes seeking the slightest thread on the boundless expanses stretching around. The white saber-tooth walked unwaveringly at Actor's right hand, its head held high, and fine nostrils quivered, catching and analyzing thousands of invisible steppe scents, wormwood, dust, distant rains, and possible danger. The next day on the road, when the sun stood at its zenith, Actor's eagle suddenly plummeted down, describing an alarmed, sharp loop in the air, then soared again, emitting a short, piercing, warning cry that cut through the silence like a knife. Actor immediately, without a word, raised his hand, and the whole motley column halted in place, as if rooted, holding its breath. "To Troll," the elder said quietly, without a single note of agitation, his golden, slanted eyes narrowing to slits, gazing at the thin line of horizon shimmering in the haze. "Strangers." Sabir followed his gaze and, peering, soon discerned in the shimmering air three dark, swiftly growing dots. They approached from the east with unnatural, alarming speed, too fast for ordinary foot warriors. "Orcs on their scrawny wargs," one of the young centaurs said with habitual contemptuous sneer, already drawing the taut string of his long bow. "No." Actor cut him off sharply as a whiplash. "Do not touch them. Stand still. Let them pass." Sabir looked at the elder with unconcealed surprise, but he did not take his cold, intent gaze off the approaching riders, and as if by an invisible but well-oiled command, the cogits, without a sound, dissolved into the tall, yellow grass, pressing to the earth and becoming practically invisible, part of the landscape itself. The saber-tooths, in turn, smoothly lay down, pressing ears flat and sinking into the ground, their spotted hides perfectly blending with the sun-scorched vegetation. The centaurs to froze, closing ranks, forming with their powerful bodies a living, impenetrable wall concealing those who had hidden behind them. Soon, three burly orcs on their wargs could be easily discerned. They rode openly, not hiding, raising small clouds of reddish dust behind them. One of them, brandishing a jagged spear in the air, shouted something hoarsely and incoherently in his guttural, abrupt dialect, turning his head side to side. They raced past just 100 paces from the hidden column, not even turning their ugly heads toward them, and soon disappeared behind another gentle hill, continuing to gallop east, unaware they had passed within a stone's throw of their own demise. When the thunder of heavy hooves finally died away in the distance, Actor slowly, with dignity, lowered his hand. "Hunters for easy prey," he explained, addressing the astonished Sabir. His voice was level. "Not scouts, not a combat patrol. They sought an antelope strayed from the herd or a lost traveler, not an entire army. The shaman's hounds do not yet know that two once divided storms have now merged into one. Let it remain so, while possible. Our main strength in this war is surprise and the enemy's ignorance." He was right, as subsequent events showed. The orcs raced past, noticing absolutely nothing except lund hills and feather grass swaying in the wind. This insignificant, at first glance, episode became the first real test of their strange, fragile alliance, and they passed it, proving their discipline and endurance. By evening of the same day, when the sun already slanted toward the very horizon, staining the boundless steppe in blood crimson and gold tones from the east, cutting through the air, the dark silhouette of the eagle returned. It silently alighted on Actor's shoulder, and between elder and bird again a silent but saturated dialogue took place, understandable only to them two. Actor's face, already grim, grew even darker, his features sharpening. "Large detachment," he said quietly, so as not to sow panic, leaning toward Sabir. "Several miles from here, to the east. Coming straight on our old trail. About 100 orcs and their wargs, if my friend's eyes are to be trusted." Sabir felt cold and sigh, his heart clenching. With them were defenseless elders, children, women, their entire fragile train. "We could try to bypass them." "Virasai," he began, but Actor sharply, almost rudely, shook his head. In his eyes, deep and intelligent, flared that very cold, predatory fire that had burned in them earlier when he spoke of vengeance. "No. They follow our very trail like a thread. They have already scented easy prey, the smell of our camels and saber-tooths. If we turn aside now, they will follow on our heels like a pack of hungry hounds, and bring others with them. Here, in open steppe, we must give them the first harsh lesson. We must not let them leave alive, to not betray our presence, and we must clearly show that the desert wind is no longer prey to be hunted. Henceforth it is again the hunter, and what to any who stand in its path." Actor turned to his warriors, who had already frozen in expectation, sensing invisible tension in the air. No loud orders, no fiery speeches, only a few abrupt, whispered phrases in their guttural, hissing language. And that was enough. The cogits silently, without fuss, dispersed like shadows, dissolving in the thickening dusk, taking up predetermined positions. The saber-tooths, obeying an invisible signal, followed them, and their eyes glowed in the approaching dark like a score of greenish coals. Even the majestic white giant vanished soundlessly, without a single sound, into the folds of the terrain, preparing for its role in the coming clash. "Order yours to stand still and make no sound," Actor said quietly, but authoritatively, his eyes seeming to see through both the steppe itself and the coming moments. "Let them be simply quiet, helpless bait on the hook." And the centaurs, gripping spear shafts, remained standing in the open, well-visible place, while the steppe itself around them seemed to hold its breath, tensed, and prepared for the death blow that was to be born from its depths. Dusk thickened swiftly, staining the boundless steppe in ashen, lilac, and deep violet tones. And in this half-light the frozen column of centaurs seemed a silent statue, as if unaware of the threat advancing from the night. The air became viscous, thick, and ringing like a taut string. Sabir, standing at the very front, heard only the hollow, rapid drumming of his own heart somewhere in his throat and the distant but steadily growing din. The clang of iron on iron, hoarse, guttural cries, and the heavy, pounding tread of dozens of feet mingled with growls. From the thickening evening gloom in the east crawled, like dark ghosts, to first gnarled silhouettes, orcs, dozens of bulky, bow-legged figures in ragged, makeshift armor of leather and rusty metal plates, with jagged axes blackened with blood and shields etched with crude marks. Beside them, snorting and bearing yellow, rotten fangs, minced their wargs, with yellow eyes burning in the dark. They came in a nosy, disordered crowd, utterly confident in their superiority and easy prey, having seen ahead only a small handful of lone centaurs. Their leader, a seasoned orc with a jagged two-handed axe, let out a victorious, deafening roar, and pointed his powerful arm toward the prey. And at that very moment, As the cry still hung in the air, the steppe came alive. Van answer. The silence was torn not by a human cry, but by a dry, whistling sound like the flight of a flock of invisible birds. Dozens of thin arrows, loosed by archers invisible in the twilight, shot from the thickets of feather grass and wormwood. They struck not at crude armor, but at gap-set, unprotected necks, armpits, narrow helmet slits. The first rank of orcs, not yet understanding what had happened, collapsed to the earth, choking on their own death rattles and cries. With throats pierced through by dark deserb hawk feathers, before the stunned orcs could grasp they were under attack, from the thickening dusk, as if from under the earth, darted low, swift shadows, saber-tooths. They were everywhere, appearing at once from all sides. One of the giants, spotted like the steppe itself, in a long, powerful leap sank its saber-like fangs into the throat of the nearest warg, with a dull, nightmarish crunch breaking its cervical vertebrae. Another, swinging a mighty, tree-like paw, knocked the head off a stunned orc, and it, describing a short arc in the air, rolled along the ground with a dull, wet thud, staring at the sky with empty eyes. But the true, soul-chilling horror began when the Cogits themselves joined the fray. They emerged from the dark soundlessly, like ghosts born of the night itself. Their long, curved blades, like sickles of the young moon, flashed in the last reflections of the departing sun. They did not slash with wide swings, like orcs they cut, delivering lightning-fast, millimeter-precise strikes. One Cogit, lithe as a reed, dodging a heavy axe blow, slipped under the arm of a roaring orc, and his blade, like a living serpent, plunged under the enemy's chin, to emerge bloodied a moment later from the back of the skull. Another, leaping onto a warg's back with cat-like ease, with two swift, precise movements cut the beast's hind tendon, and the creature collapsed howling in pain, crushing its rider beneath. The white saber-tooth was like a pale, soundless storm. It did not roar, made no sound. It simply killed in tomb-like, frightening silence. Its might was absolute and crushing. It tore through orc ranks like a whirlwind, leaving behind only a bloody path of mangled, mutilated bodies. It struck one warrior with a front paw with such monstrous force that the chest caved in, with the disgusting crunch of breaking ribs, and the orc, dropping his weapon, collapsed soundlessly to the ground, wheezing and choking on blood gushing from his mouth. To another, trying to flee, the white giant simply, almost effortlessly, snapped the spine, and the body, jerking several times in final convulsion, went limp like a rag. The air instantly filled with the thick copper smell of fresh blood, the nauseating stench of torn entrails, and the death-rattling, gurgling gasps of the dying. The orcs, at first confident of easy victory, fell into complete confusion and terror. They saw their comrades fall without sound with slit throats, saw a hail of arrows pour on them from unseen, dark directions, saw spotted shadows leap from the very darkness, mercilessly tearing flesh and breaking bones. One of them, turning at a strange sound, saw a young Cogit, almost a bow, with a face distorted not by fury but cold, concentrated resolve. With a deft movement gut a comrade. Intestines, hot and steaming in the evening air, spilled out in a thick loop, wrapping around the orc's own boot in scarlet, slippery coals. The one whose belly was ripped open knelt, with a mad, uncomprehending gaze trying to stuff the spilling entrails back in, his fingers slipping in the bloody, warm mess, finding no purchase. A nearby orc, gripped by rage and fear, roared and rushed at the youth, swinging his heavy axe. But the bow, performing an almost acrobatic flip, evaded the death blow. In the leap, his blade flashed like lightning, describing a short arc, and severed the orc's arm at the elbow. The orc roared, in horror and unbearable pain, staring at the bloody stump from which a dark, thick stream spurted, splattering grass, his own face and armor. But the young Cogit did not stop. Landing soundlessly as a falling leaf, he took a step forward. His blade, still bloodied, described another, short and deadly arc and entered point first under the stunned orc's chin, went through, and stuck with a dull thud in the base of the skull. The roar turned into a gurgling, bubbling wheeze. The orc fell first to his knees, then onto his back, eyes wide, in which animal bewilderment and horror froze forever. The youth, not changing expression, stepped a foot on the fallen enemy's chest to pull out his blade, steel freed from bone and flesh with a nasty, grating sound. He shifted his cold gaze to the first orc, who still crouched, madly clutching his spilled intestines, without a trace of doubt or pity, almost with mechanical precision. The young warrior swung his blade once more. The orc's head flew from shoulders and rolled over bloodied grass, its fading, glassy gaze fixed on the crimsoning sky. The fight, begun as an ambush, quickly turned into chaotic, wild bloody butchery. A warg, scenting death and the smell of blood everywhere, in blind fury leaped at the nearest cogit, but he, instead of recoiling, met the beast, ducking and diving under its fanged, gaping maw. The blade went deep under the warg's jaw and out through the back of its skull, but the frenzied beast, in its last effort, managed to sink a clawed paw into the warrior's shoulder, tearing out chunks of flesh along with quilted robe fabric. They collapsed to the ground together, and the cogit, choking on his own blood, wheezing, with a last effort twisted the blade in the creature's skull, finishing it. Nearby, a mighty orc with a face twisted by fury, swinging a heavy two-handed hammer, brought it down on the head of a young saber-tooth that failed to dodge in time. The skull bone crunched like a dry branch underfoot, and the beast collapsed, jerking in final convulsions. But before the orc could pull his bloody weapon from the crushed head, a cogit woman, light as a feather, dropped onto his broad, armored back with a quiet rustle of clothing. Her thin, needle-like dagger plunged 3 times into the orc's neck between armor plates with honed lightning speed, finding the unprotected spot. Dark blood gushed in a hot fountain, drenching her face, arms, and chest in crimson streaks. The orc, eyes wide in silent surprise, soundlessly fell to his knees, and the woman already slipped from his dying body, dissolving into the thickening dusk, leaving behind only a steaming bloody trail on the ground. The white saber-tooth, like a pale ghost of implacable death, swept through the densest enemy clusters, and its movement was like a reaper's work in the field. One orc, gathering all his desperate courage, tried to stop it, jabbing a long spear into its mighty flank. The shaft snapped with a dry crack against the beast's shoulder, leaving not even a scratch on its hide. The next moment, a huge paw with claws each the length of a grown man's finger swept half the orc's face away, leaving only a bloody, exposed skull with one madly rolling eye. Another warrior, swinging an axe, the saber-tooth simply pressed to the ground with its whole colossal mass, and from beneath its body came a wet, squelching sound. Bones and entrails turned into uniform bloody pulp. In the very thick of the slaughter, a young centaur from Sabir's squad, unable to bear the tension and sight of perishing allies, rushed into battle despite clear orders. His long spear accurately pierced the throat of an orc who had lagged behind, shouting curses from the rear. But immediately 2 other orcs pounced on him like a pack of hungry dogs. One drove a short, broadsword into his flank, and the centaur, roaring in wild pain, collapsed onto his forelegs, trying to stay upright. The second orc, grinning, already raised his jagged axe over the defenseless neck, but at that moment from the dark, like an embodied shadow of retribution, darted a lean figure. Old Actor, with a movement incredible for his years, sprang forward, and his simple wooden staff topped with a carved bone knob drove with all force into the orc's throat. Cartilage crunched. The orc, dropping the axe, wheezed and fell onto his back, choking on his own blood. Actor, not even deigning the saved centaur a glance, already turned, and his faithful eagle with a piercing, triumphant cry plummeted from the sky, taking out the eyes of another attacker who recoiled in terror. Covering his face with hands, the last surviving orcs, gripped by animal fear, huddled in a tight ring, pressing backs together, and desperately, with mad eyes, fought off the invisible enemy. But this only prolonged their agony. The steppe around them stirred, came alive. From the tall, swaying grass silently rose dozens of cogit archers. Soundlessly, without a single command, they loosed an even, deadly volley. Arrows with a hissing sound sank into wooden shields, rusty armor, unprotected faces and necks. One orc, trying to shield himself, took an arrow straight in the eye and, falling backward, collapsed, dragging off balance a comrade with him. The ring broke, formation disrupted, and into the gap formed, heads lowered, entered the saber-tooths. This was no longer a battle, but a methodical, merciless finishing. The beasts, with quiet, threatening growls, approached each fallen enemy and with powerful bites tore their throats, utterly depriving them of last chances at life. The silence that followed the battle was thicker, heavier, and more terrible than the most tense pre-battle expectation. It hung in the air, mingled with the acrid smell of fresh blood, torn intestines, and the excrement of death that filled everything around. The moon, cold and utterly indifferent, floated out from behind ragged clouds, illuminating with its ghostly light the field strewn with mutilated bodies. Its light was merciful, it hid the most monstrous details, turning bloody pulp and scattered entrails into silvery, lifeless patterns. The Cogits moved among the dead soundlessly, like ghosts come for their due. They did not celebrate, did not exchange glances. Their work was grim, habitual, and methodical. One warrior, stepping on intestines slippery and spread on the ground, slipped but immediately, with cat-like grace, regained balance, his face remaining an inscrutable stone mass. Another, bending over the body of an orc still twitching in death throes, with a short, precise, merciful stroke of his blade put an end to its torment. The sound was quiet, only a wet slap, after which the body finally went limp, passing into eternal rest. The young centaur, the one who had rushed into battle headlong, lay on his side, breathing heavily and raggedly, each breath coming with enormous effort. His wound in the side gaped as a dark, ragged hole from which scarlet, frothing foam slowly oozed. Two of his kin were already beside him on their knees, trying to plug the terrible wound with bunches of steppe grass. The blood stubbornly seeped through their fingers, staining hands in sticky, dark crimson. His eyes, hollow with wild pain and bitter shame, were wide open and stared at the indifferent night sky, not seeing the stars. The white saber-tooth stood on a small rise like on a throne, and slowly, rhythmically licked its bloodied front paw. Its mighty flank was scored by a couple of shallow, but gaping wounds, traces of desperate, last attempts by orcs to harm it somehow. But it seemed not to notice them, felt no pain. Its blue, icy eyes, cold and bottomless as mountain lakes, slowly, unhurriedly slid over the whole battlefield, seeking the slightest sign of life. Its mission would not be complete while a single enemy still breathed and could raise a weapon. Actor approached Sabir with a firm step. The elder seemed utterly untouched by the past battle. Only on his simple wooden staff dark sticky, already drying brown blood clung. "Losses?" Sabir asked quietly, with a strained voice, tearing his gaze from the mutilated body of his kin with difficulty. "2 of ours fell, a few more lightly wounded," Actor answered just as quietly, without emotion. "And one of the saber-tooths, young, inexperienced." In his voice was no hint of sorrow, no gloating. There was only simple, dry statement of fact, as if counting damage tools after hard work. "Yours, one gravely wounded, the rest unharmed," Sabir responded, feeling a lump in his throat. "Thank you for that help." "Back then." Actor merely nodded shortly, his piercing gaze fixed eastward, from where this first threat had come and where, he knew, others lurked. A larger, hungrier beast will soon scent the blood and come following, like a vulture. "We must move now, without delay." He turned sharply and emitted a short, abrupt sound like the cry of a night raptor. The Cogits instantly froze, then just as soundlessly and organized began to gather to the center. To their leader, the wounded, groaning and pale, were carefully loaded onto dromedary backs, whose humps rose like mute barrows. The bodies of the 2 fallen Cogits, carefully wrapped in their own quilted, dust-filled robes, were laid on other pack beasts to be interred later, in a secluded and sacred place. As custom demanded, the body of the fallen young saber-tooth was left for steppe scavengers. Nature itself would care for it, returning flesh to earth. The column moved on, leaving behind a dark, enormous, blood-soaked stain on the silvery, silent steppe. They departed just as soundlessly and invisibly as they had attacked, as if the night itself had birthed them for swift retribution and now drew them back into its womb. Only black, impatient crows already flocking to the bloody feast, and the howling of a lone, piercing wind would soon break the oppressive silence over the field of death. The battle was won. First blood in this alliance spilled. But each of them, young and old, understood deep down this was only the first, barely perceptible, preliminary breath of the truly monstrous storm approaching. The path to the heart of the steppe took another long, tense days. The column now moved faster than before. The wounded centaur held on courageously, gritting his teeth, but everyone understood he needed real help, not just grass and bandages. Tension in the air did not abate for a moment. Actor's eagle almost never alighted on his shoulder, continuously circling in the celestial heights, its keen eyes scanning every hill and hollow. And the saber-tooths, tirelessly, ranged along the edges, scenting the air for new danger, their ears constantly alert, bodies tense. On the 3rd day, when the sun stood at its zenith and air streamed above scorched earth, from the west came a distant but astonishingly clear sound of a horn, deep and drawn out, as if the ancient steppe itself gave voice, heralding the approach of its children. Sabir, walking at the column's head, immediately turned to actor, and on his weary, dust-covered face appeared for the first time in all this hard journey a faint, but undeniable semblance of a smile, washing away some of the weariness. "That's ours," he said, and in his voice sounded notes of long-forgotten relief. "Sentinels from the forward outposts. They've spotted us." Soon, on the shimmering horizon, swiftly approaching riders appeared. A dozen centaurs clad in practical leather armor, with long, polished to-a-shine spears in hand. They galloped with such furious speed that the earth under their powerful hooves trembled and hummed as before an earthquake. Riding up within earshot, they abruptly halted, forming a half-circle, and their eyes, accustomed to expanses, with unconcealed amazement and deep wariness lit over the hitherto unseen column of Khajiits, their majestic saber-tooths, and unhurried camels. Sabir, one of them, a gray-maned warrior with a face etched by wrinkles and scars, shouted, "By the wine spirit, we thought the orcs ground you to dust in the steppe. Who is this with you?" "Friends, Horn," Sabir called back loudly, and his voice sounded firm and confident. "Children of the desert wind, we bring them to Croter. We have a wounded man. He needs help." Horn's gaze fell on the white saber-tooth walking beside actor, and his eyes widened in amazement. He, having seen much in his long life, had never seen these majestic beasts, of which only legends told by elders at night fires spoke. "Come faster, do not linger," he whispered, lowering his voice as if afraid to scare off luck. "Croter and Kiron await. The allotted time for gathering is already up. We were ready to march." The sentinels wheeled and galloped back to announce the long-awaited tidings. The remaining path the column covered in a strange, dual atmosphere, universal relief at the soon end of the hard journey mixed with tense, almost tangible curiosity. And finally, from the crest of a high, hard grass-covered hill, they saw it in all its might and grandeur. The heart of the steppe. This was no mere marching camp. It was a whole living city woven of leather, sturdy canvas, and quivering living flesh. Thousands of centaurs filled a valley vast as a sea. Hundreds of sturdy, hide-covered yurts stood. Countless campfires smoked. Everywhere warriors in armor bustled, women occupied with household chores, and frolicking foals. The air hummed like a giant beehive from voices merging into one roar, hoarse whinnies, rhythmic clang of smiths' hammers, and the general, resonant breathing of a huge herd gathered for great war. When Sabir's and actors' column slowly began descending into the valley down the gentle slope, the general hum began to subside, as if by an invisible hand's wave. Hundreds, then thousands of heads turned toward them, eyes picking out unfamiliar silhouettes in the daytime haze. First pure, mute amazement, then deep, weary silence. No one had ever seen before strangers Khajiits with their saber-tooths and camels enter the very heart of the centaurs, their sacred gathering place. They walked along a living, silent corridor formed for them. Silent, oppressive. The Khajiits' dromedaries nervously snorted and tossed heads, feeling the weight of thousands of studying gazes upon them. The saber-tooths walked, heads low, ears flattened, bearing long fangs, their muscular backs tense as strings. Even the white giant, usually imperturbable and majestic, emitted a low, guttural, warning rumble that sent shivers down many spines. And then ahead, at the foot of the largest yurt of bleached high, familiar, waiting figures appeared. Croter, his mighty chest covered with a network of old scars breathing calm strength, and beside him Kiron, his face, having seen so many horrors in stone depths and on ash heaps, now expressed a whole gamut of conflicting feelings: mute disbelief, flaring like a torch hope, and something like deep, paternal pride. The column halted 20 paces from them, freezing in respectful expectation. Actor took one but weighty step forward. His faithful eagle with a loud, triumphant shriek soared from his shoulder, described a wide circle in the air, and perched on the very top of the carved pole at the entrance to the chieftain's yurt. This gesture, simple and majestic, was more eloquent than any, even the most fiery words. Croter, not taking his piercing gaze off him, also took a step forward, and his hoof struck the hard earth with a dull thud. Silence in the valley became absolute. Ringing, one could hear embers crackling in the nearest campfire and wormwood rustling in the wind. Elder Croter was first to break the silence, and his voice, accustomed to commanding thousands, sounded surprisingly loud and clear in this silence. "My messenger said he would bring survivors from the slaughter, but I see before me not wretched fugitives. I see warriors come with weapons in hand." Actor slowly, with undoubted dignity, inclined his grey head, performing the ancient gesture of respect between equal leaders. "We come at the call of your oath of the steppe, chieftain," he uttered, and his quiet voice was audible to each. "We are the last fragment of the desert wind tribe that miraculously survived. We bring with us our pain, our fury, and our desert-tempered blades, and we are ready to inscribe our blood in the common chronicle of this war." He turned and shortly nodded to his tribesmen standing behind in complete silence, and then the Cogits, all to a one, both men and women, synchronously, with one movement, dared their long, curved blades and thrust them point first into the earth before themselves, bowing their heads. This was an ancient ritual of desert peoples, a mute but eloquent offering of their strength and life in exchange for honest alliance and shelter under alien sky. Crowder looked at this suddenly grown forest of blades gleaming in the sun, at the stern, unshakable dignity-filled faces of the Cogits, at the majestic, monument-like figure of the white saber-tooth, and then he slowly, solemnly, drew his own famous battle-axe from behind his backhand with force thrust it into the earth. Decide actor's nearest blade. Steel clanged against steel, blood for blood, steel for steel. His voice like thunder born in a mighty chest rolled through the whole valley, reaching its farthest edge. "Henceforth your pain is our pain, your vengeance our common duty." His words became the long-awaited signal all had awaited. The hum, restrained until this moment, exploded in deafening, jubilant roar. Thousands of centaurs, as one, raised spears, axes, and bows skyward, welcoming the new allies. The din was so mighty it seemed audible for miles around. The whole steppe shuddered, accepting new, stern children into its great family. The war advancing from the east had gained new, furious and skilled opponents. Entering Crowder's spacious, smoke-and-hide scented yurt, actor paused for a moment at the very entrance, allowing his keen eyes to adjust to the semi-darkness reigning inside, broken only by the dim light seeping through the smoke hole above, and gleams of flame from the hearth. The air here was thick, heavy, and saturated, smelling of smoke from smoldering aromatic roots. Tanned leather and dried healing herbs hung along the walls. In the very center, around a low stone hearth where dry twigs crackled, on scattered thick bison and Saga skins sat Crowder, Kiron, and several most respected, already great elders of the herds. Their faces, illuminated by leaping orange flame tongues, were immobile, serious, and filled with deep concentration. Actor lowered himself onto the offered skin with the same majestic, unhurried slowness with which he did everything in his life, as if each movement was part of some ancient ritual. The white saber-tooth remained at the entrance, curled by the very flap into a mighty coil, but its pale blue eyes, coldly reflecting the hearth fire, were open and utterly vigilant, and ears slightly twitched, catching every sound from outside. "Tell us now everything, elder," Crowder began without extra ceremonies or introductions, as warriors accustomed to harsh truth speak among themselves. "We know of the last battle at the Oasis of Three Stones and your chieftain's death from Kiron, to whom your own Myrsel told the whole truth. But how did you manage to survive, escape death? What did you see on your way?" Actor slowly, heavily nodded, and his gaze seemed to turn inward, into those terrible, painfully vivid memories burning him from within. "After our chieftain remained to meet his fate and delay pursuit, we went into the underground passages." His voice was quiet and surprisingly even, but each spoken word fell into the yurt's tense silence with the weight and significance of a granite boulder. "Those passages known only to us, children of the desert, we see in total dark no worse than under scorching sun. We walked many days, seeing no light, losing count of time. With us were elders, women, small children, and he." Actor nodded shortly toward the white beast lying at the entrance. "He and other saber-toothed cats were our living shields and guides in the stone labyrinths. They scented danger and water, or we were blind and helpless." He made a small pause, gathering his thoughts, his fingers slowly fingering the fringe on his quilted robe. "When we finally emerged to the surface, these were no longer our sands, but alien steppes. We became a shadow moving over feather grass, trying to leave no trail. We saw human villages smoking with black smoke on the horizon. How orc patrols crawled over the earth like venomous serpents. We understood already then the threat is not local, not limited to our lands. It is like a plague spreading through the world. And then I, as leader, made a fatal mistake." In his always calm voice, for the first time, a bitter, piercing note of regret and wrath sounded. "I decided to go to Almerion, to reach the capital and warn the Empire, before it was too late. We could send our caravans with goods there annually, and we know all the secret, hidden from outside our eyes trails. I reached its very great stone walls that but the sky. I saw it, this great, nosy stone hive, full of blind arrogance and complacency. He exhaled with unconcealed contempt, and his lips twisted. I demanded an audience in the very Palace of Three Crowns. I was honored to be heard by some pompous officials in silks, smelling of expensive perfumes and old wine. I appealed to their reason. I spoke to them of an orc army that came from the Iron Belly. But they looked down on me, saw a mad desert dweller come with delirious tales. I was told that the Empire will deal with its enemies on the borders itself, that the legions have the situation fully under control. Actor caught his breath, recalling that day when he came with warning to the capital city. I was not even allowed into the throne hall's antechamber, fenced off by a wall of bureaucracy and indifference. I returned to my people with nothing, with empty hands and bitter certainty that doom, if it comes, will be universal. For those who should have been our shield turned out blind, deaf, and absorbed in their petty games. And then, Actor continued, and his voice again gained steely, unbending firmness. We made the only right decision. We decided that since the common shield had rotted from within, we must rely only on our own claws and teeth. We went even deeper into the steppes, hoping to find some quiet, forgotten by all refuge. And we found it, and we survived as we could, day after day, until your messenger found us and brought the tidings that change everything. Tidings of the Oath of the Steppe. Tidings that not all in this world chose convenient blindness and deafness. He looked straight at Croter, and in his gaze burned cold, cleansing fire. You ask what we saw. We saw the beginning of the end, an end that begins not with the thunder of battles, but with the quiet whisper and criminal indifference of those who have the strength and power to stop it. But now I see something else. I see those who chose to raise weapons and look danger in the face, instead of hiding their heads in sand like ostriches. And that is why we are here. Our vengeance is not merely thirst for blood or blind fury. It is grim necessity. While this shaman breeds, no hearth in this world, no dwelling will be safe, neither in desert, nor in steppe, nor behind stone walls of cities. He devours the very past, the very memory of peoples, and if he is not stopped now, the future will have no roots, no history, no life itself. Actor's words hung in the yurt's stuffy air, filled with the crackle of fire and the heavy, measured breathing of warriors sitting around. They were like the last cornerstone laid in the foundation of the common, irrevocable decision, securing it with their weight. Croter slowly, with some effort, rose to his full colossal height, his shadow, huge and flickering from the flame, pressed against the very walls of the yurt, filling all space. Enough words. His voice was low, hollow and implacable, as the rumble of an underground tremor heralding eruption. We have heard of the enemy's strength, we have heard of his monstrous cruelty, we have seen his tentacles in our own steppes. There is no more to argue and doubt about. He swept a slow, authoritative gaze over all gathered elders. Naru's Demerica waits our coming. The dwarves and our brothers, who went there with Kiron, await reinforcement. Each day of our delay, each wasted minute plays into the shaman's hands and his hordes. All present silently but firmly nodded, their eyes reading full agreement and resolve. The decision was finally made, and there was no way back. And then Actor, who had until now sat motionless, raised his head. In his golden, wildcat eyes flashed a distant but living spark of long-buried and almost lost hope. When we left the desert, forever abandoning our hearths, I sent tidings with my eagle to other, still surviving Cogit tribes, the Dawn Cliffs, the Sand Phantoms. I warned them of our fate and that we were going into the steppes. Connection with them is not completely severed. My eagle knows the way to their hidden encampments. Perhaps they too have heard the call and made their choice. He straightened his back and continued. The shaman broke one tribe, one fragment of the desert wind. That the desert itself is immeasurably vast and full of hidden places, and in its depths still remain those who remember the taste of true freedom, and breathe with full chest. I can send them a new call, a new sign. Not tidings of flight and despair, but a call to great war, not for own salvation, but for life itself, for the right of all living peoples to breathe under this single sky, not to be consumed by eternal, hopeless darkness. Kiron, until now silent and immersed in his thoughts, sharply raised his head, and his eyes, accustomed to horizons, flashed in the semi-darkness. They will come, after what happened to your tribe. They will truly risk leaving their sheltered sands and come into the light. They are true children of sun-scorched earth, Actor answered with a bitter, knowing smile not reaching his eyes. They suckled the language of brute force with mother's milk, and understand cruel necessity better than some bookish sages in capital libraries. They saw the black smoke from our extinguished campfires rise to the sky and scatter. They know deep in their hearts that next in line may be their own fate, and now they will learn there are those who do not flee, but gather strength for a counterstrike. Some, the most cautious, will consider this pure madness, but others will hear in this call the last, desperate chance. A chance to die not like hunted beasts in deaf sands, but as warriors, with claws sunk into the very throat of death. Croter long and intently looked at Actor, as if weighing each his word on invisible but precise scales of fate. Do what you must, he finally cut off, and finality sounded in his voice. Let your bird fly today. Let it carry this tidings to all deaf canyons and shifting dunes. But we will not sit and wait for their answer. We set out in 3 days. If they wish to join us, let them catch up to our column on the way to the Dwarven Mountains. The council was over. A moment later Actor stood on the highest hill, beyond the nosy camp's boundaries. The night wind, knowing no barriers, tousled his gray, dreadlocked hair. Onto his raised, like an ancient symbol, arm silently alighted the mighty, faithful eagle. The elder with deft, habitual movements attached to its powerful leg-thin strips of specially treated skin, inscribed with small conventional signs. In them was contained not a plea for help, but stern tidings. Tidings that to survive in the coming, one must fight all together, regardless of past strife. Fly, old friend, Actor whispered, and his voice was almost carried away by the wind. Fly to the dawn cliffs, to the sand phantoms. Carry them not empty hope, but a grim chose. Steel or dust, dazzle or oblivion. The eagle, as if understanding every word, powerfully beat its wings and soared into the black night sky. Its dark silhouette for a moment slid across the cold face of the moon, and soundlessly vanished eastward, toward distant, scorching and merciless wastelands. And below, in the enormous valley, great, hitherto unseen preparation began. The heart of the steppe, already seething with activity before, now exploded with feverish work comparable only to the eruption of a waking volcano. Croter's order, transmitted by dozens of commanders' voices, rolled through the entire camp like an alarm bell. North, to the alliance, to war. Great preparation began, unlike any many generations had seen. This was no longer the hasty gathering of fugitives as it had been weeks before. This was total, all-consuming mobilization of an entire civilization risen for mortal combat. Experienced mastersmiths, whose ancestors had for generations forged weapons for the whole herd, now days and nights on end did not leave red-hot portable forges. The air filled with the incessant, rhythmic clang of hammers on red-hot steel, forging deadly spear and arrowheads, and the insistent grind of whetstones honing battle-axe and sword blades to razor sharpness. Women did not fold yurts, they gathered in large groups, sewed from toughest leather additional arrow quivers, tight bandage packs, and sturdy straps for gear. Even foals, understanding the seriousness of the moment, carried heavy water skins and armfuls of firewood for smiths. Their usually carefree and playful games replaced by concentrated, almost adult and silent help. Actor and his cogits did not stand aside, feeling like guests. They became living, stern teaching aids for the steppe dwellers. Cogit scouts visually showed groups of young centaurs how to move silently, how to use the slightest terrain unevenness, how to mask their tracks. Becoming part of the landscape, they demonstrated, on dummies, the deadly, lightning efficiency of their curved blades in swift close combat. The saber-tooths, in turn, evoked in centaurs simultaneous animal fear and unconcealed admiration. Warriors studied their habits, learning to recognize the slightest signals they gave with ear and tail position. The white saber-tooth seemed to understand all happening around. It often stood on the most visible rise, observing the preparations with its cold gaze, and its blue, piercing stare seemed to see farther and clearer than any man's. It was a living symbol, a symbol of irreplaceable loss, coming vengeance, and that primal fury driving them all forward. In 3 days spent in unceasing labor, the camp transformed beyond recognition. All traces of a temporary, disorganized encampment vanished. In its place, lined up in perfect order, stood a gigantic military machine ready for the long march. Thousands of centaurs, divided into mobile, easily manageable squads by tribe and age. Hundreds of cogits and their fearsome, obedient beasts, skillfully woven into the common battle formation. An endless, miles-long train of pack camels and sturdy wagons, laden with supplies for many weeks of travel. And on the morning of the fourth day, when the first sun rays touched hilltops, Croter rode out onto the central, highest hill. His figure, illuminated by the rising luminary, seemed carved from granite itself, the embodiment of unbreakable will. He did not speak long, pompous speeches. He simply bared his famous battle-axe and with a mighty gesture pointed it north, where their path lay. Onward, he thundered, and his lone voice, taken up and amplified by 1,000 throats, rolled through the valley like thunder. For the Alliance, for life, for the steppe. And the great march began. The earth trembled and groaned under the simultaneous impact of tens of thousands of hooves. This was no mere departure or movement. It was the movement of the earth itself, awakened for the last war. The whole steppe shuddered, giving birth to a storm that bore on its wings both the furious valor of centaurs and the cold, merciless vengeance of cogits, and the last, fragile hope of salvation for all living things. They marched north, to snow-capped mountains, toward their single fate and the war that was to decide the fate of the whole world. At the end of another day's journey, filled with the monotonous beat of hooves, the boundless, one seemingly endless steppe slowly, almost imperceptibly began to yield to the hilly, stony foothills of the dragon spine's eastern peaks, whose ashen summits already loomed on the horizon like a jagged palisade. The air here grew drier and sharper, it burned the throat, and the wind, meeting no more obstacles, drove torn, ragged clouds across the pale sky with redoubled force, like a flock of ghosts hurrying somewhere. It was then, at an evening halt by a long dry riverbed, that the long-awaited eagle returned from the south, cutting through the faded sky. The bird, usually proud, swift, and tireless, this time alighted on Actor's outstretched arm heavily, almost falling, with drooping, faded wings. Its feathers, once glossy, were covered with a thick layer of yellow dust, and in its intelligent, piercing eyes stood inexpressible weariness of a long and incredibly perilous journey through scorched lands. Actor, without a word, with careful, almost reverent movements, removed from its leg several thin, tightly rolled scrolls of leather strips, etched with small, skillfully embossed signs the script of his people, while the exhausted bird greedily drank water from a proffered travel cup. The elder silently immersed himself in reading, his face remaining an inscrutable stone mask, but as he read, in the depths of his golden eyes, like embers under ash, kindled and grew cold, implacable fire of resolve. That evening by the common march fire, where Croter, Kiron, and the most respected her elders gathered, Actor at last shared the tidings brought by his winged messenger. The chieftain of the Sand Phantoms tribe writes, he began, and his voice, always even, now was like a taut string, and each listener felt the tension hidden in it. Their cliffs, serving them as an impregnable fortress for centuries, are no longer a refuge. From the east, from the deepest, unknown crevices, crawl creatures scorpids, huge as if molded from darkness and chitin, spawn of depths that knew no sunlight. Their venom, black as pitch, melts stone, and their powerful pincers break steel like dry twigs. The tribe fights back with its last strength, but each day their ranks thin, and water and will reserves are running out. He set aside the first scroll and took another, his fingers trembling slightly, but from wrath, not weakness. And this tidings from the chieftain of the Dawn Cliffs. They face a scourge of a different kind. Mantle wings, winged creatures whose poison stings know no miss, attack them from the sky. Their traditional nomadic roots, laid by ancestors, are cut by orc hordes. Hunting grounds that fed their generations are devastated to the ground. The wastes as we knew them are no more. There is no life there, no hope, only slow, agonizing extinction under the relentless onslaught of creatures the shaman called from the darkest, forgotten caverns of this world. Actor paused, letting the gathered warriors fully grasp the monstrous scale of the approaching catastrophe that spared not even the most inhospitable corners of the earth. But the main, most alarming thing, both tribes, independently of each other, report the same. The horde squeezing the last juices from the dying dessert are commanded not by some common orc chieftain or general. They call him Gorak, and his name already sows soul-chilling fear, for where he and his hordes pass, nothing living remains, neither grass, nor beast, nor hope. He looked at the stern warriors gathered by the fire, and in his gaze was no shadow of empty hope, no wormhole of despair, only grim, dispassionate statement of terrible fact. And yet, both tribes accepted our call. They see no other way out, no other path for themselves. They are ready to leave the smoldering ash heaps of their ancient homes and move north, to join us. Our column. They go to this war not for phantom glory or rich plunder. They go because behind them lies only certain, agonizing death, and ahead the only, even if desperate, chance to survive, sinking their last claws and blades into the common enemy's throat. And also, both chieftains report that the tribe of the children of the dry riverbed is no more. The tidings brought by the eagle were like a blinding flash of lightning in pitch-dark night. They brought no joy or relief, but they brought something more important, chilling certainty. The war they had undertaken was not a reckless adventure of a handful of desperate brave hearts. It was grim necessity, iron knee, which, it turned out, was understood and felt even in the remotest, God-forsaken corners of the world. And now, knowing that from the south moved new, battered but unbroken allies, hungry for battle and righteous vengeance, the united army of centaurs and cogits continued its northward path with a new, sharp feeling, not merely unyielding resolve, but grim anticipation of the coming, all-crushing storm that gather under its banners all who still had the will to live. Thank you for your attention. Please like and subscribe so you don't miss the next part and chapter.